Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm a truck driver. Most days my job isn't out of the ordinary. I tend to have my hands full making sure I deliver the goods on time, keeping up with family life, and sharing laughable stories with my friends over a game of cards. Little did I know that soon enough all that would take a backseat to the most terrifying experience of my life. I was hauling a load from Phoenix, Arizona to Portland, Oregon. This trip was long and tedious, and I had been on the road for a few days when I arrived at one of those big 24-hour truck stops. I picked up an energy drink along with some friendly banter with the cashier there. He chuckled as he gave me an unusual warning. Don't get too close to those woods nearby. Folks say it's not safe. We exchanged good-natured ribbing, and I waved as I walked back to my truck. To be honest, it sounded like something you tell kids just to keep them away from any potential danger. But it was entertaining nonetheless. That evening, as twilight fell, I decided to park my trailer and get some rest for a few hours in a nearby motel located just off the main highway. After retiring to my room and catching up on calls with loved ones back home, I made sure to set my alarm to wake me up before having heavy eyes pull me under into sleep. The sound of police sirens blazing suddenly jolted me awake in the middle of the night. Groggy eyes fixed on the digital clock next to the bed. 3:13 in the morning, much earlier than anticipated for my alarm clock. Peering outside, showers of intimidating red and blue lights reflected on buildings from several police cars surrounding an apartment complex across the street. A dark figure, vaguely humanoid, sprinted out of the chaos and disappeared into the woods near the motel with remarkable speed. Sensing something might be wrong, the idea to call for help crossed my mind. But the individual was wearing a hoodie with a bandana pulled over their face, making it hard to give a clear description of them. Besides, they were already gone. When morning came around and I recuperated from the night before, I couldn't be more ready to leave this small town tragedy behind. The sight of those flat, flashing police lights haunted me just as much as the loss of rest. Picking up a local newspaper, sitting idly on the motel's front desk television stand, a front-page headline article caught my undivided attention. A woman had been horrendously attacked overnight in her apartment, suffering unspeakable brutality in both physical appearance and psyche. The image of that shadowy figure from only hours before sprinting away flashed back into my mind. Some hours later, I was back on the highway and found myself still reflecting on last night's incident as I drove. Morning radio hosts were having a field day discussing rumors about a brash and violent self-proclaimed avenger lurking within our communities. As I listened more intently to their words and pieced together what little information I could glean from them when it happened, my truck swerved suddenly as if something had hit its side, forcing me to maintain control and fight to prevent a total trailer topple maneuver. Heart pounding in my chest like some untamable beast, I slammed the brakes with reckless force while my ears reverberated with surreal stillness. just as I was about to step out of the cab to investigate the situation further. There, he was through the dusty cabin window. The man from last night, standing only mere feet away. Knives glistening coldly under the roadside lamp's eerie illuminance revealed themselves clearly to me, clutched firm between both gruesomely clothed hands. His eyes meeting mine were filled with a malice I had never felt so afraid of before. The thought of calling for help crossed my mind, but I hesitated, knowing that the hooded figure outside my truck had already displayed the ability to evade the police. Moreover, I couldn't be certain if he intended to target me, or if it was just a terrible coincidence. Instead, I reached for my phone and started to record him. If something dreadful happened to me or anyone else in these parts again, I would at least have video evidence to provide to the authorities. As I raised my phone to capture the footage, he seemed to notice my movement and began approaching the truck. In response to his unexpected advance, I quickly locked the doors. He stopped just a few feet away, gazing intensely at me as though trying to discern my intentions. Then, quite unexpectedly, he turned away and sprinted into the nearby woods. Shaken by this encounter, I immediately dialed 911 to report what had just happened. With trembling fingers, I attempted to relay every detail of what had transpired. Just then, another truck driver appeared on the scene and moved towards his vehicle parked beside mine. I quickly slid out of my truck and showed him my recording of the man with the knives. The driver's face grew pale as he stared at my screen. "That guy, his name's Vincent Kane," he said in a barely audible whisper, looking around nervously. "I've seen him before. Everyone thinks he's some kind of avenger seeking justice. But why?" I asked urgently. "The rumor is that his family was involved in some serious crimes," continued the driver. "Several years ago, they were all killed in an act of retribution by a rival gang. Now Vincent has supposedly taken it upon himself to right those wrongs." Shocked at what I was hearing, we called for backup and waited for the authorities together. It seemed unbelievable that anyone could go down such a twisted path and commit such heinous acts in pursuit of revenge. But the more I thought about his behavior, that look of absolute hatred in his eyes, the more horrifyingly sense it made. Over the next few days, the community was on high alert. People were locking their doors and windows and not venturing out after dark. Reports of grisly attacks filtered in from nearby towns, all attributed to Vincent Kane. But as time went on, the attacks ceased, and an eerie calm began to settle over the area. The people who lived there hoped fervently that this unrest was finally over. I held on to the hope that perhaps Vincent had a change of heart or fled elsewhere. One morning, after spending a restless night in my truck, I received a text message from an unknown number. Opening the message was nothing short of a sickening shock. It was a photo of my family at our house. The word justice was written beneath it in large, menacing letters. Horror gripped me like a vice, making it difficult to breathe. It seemed Vincent had somehow known my every move and turned his sights on me and my family. Panic rushed through me as I realized that no matter how much distance I attempted to place between me and the sharp-edged dangers of Vincent, he'd still managed to infiltrate my world. As my pulse hammered in my ears, I called my family urgently, instructing them to seek safety with relatives miles away. They moved as fast as they could and quickly agreed. Vincent Kane's reign of terror ended unexpectedly only weeks later. His body was discovered deep within those very woods near the motel after a gunfight with police officers that had him cornered. But despite receiving a letter claiming he harbored no ill will towards me because he recognized that the claims against me were false, his menacing presence continues to haunt me to this day. I am tormented by the relentless nature of Vincent's pursuit. Was I merely a pawn in his twisted game? Or was there a greater reason he had set his sights on me? In the cold silence of an endless highway, these are the questions that continue to haunt my mind. The sky had a cold gray hue as I adjusted the collar of my jacket, trying to keep the chill at bay. My name is Samuel Rivers, and as a truck driver, I've seen more than my fair share of peculiar things in this line of work. Today was no different. I arrived at the heartland of the U.S., a remote warehouse in Nebraska, which felt far removed from the city dweller life I normally craved. "Hey Sam, how's it hanging, man?" I called out to Carlos Martinez, my supervisor for today, from across the parking lot. "Just another day in paradise," I replied with a chuckle. The truth was I felt worn out, like this job was draining me mentally and physically. Carlos was a good guy, and always managed to lift everyone's spirits with his humor and easygoing demeanor. The warehouse we were visiting had bolted down its doors for security purposes. It made me feel uneasy, and an unexplained knot began forming in my stomach as Carlos unlocked the heavy doors. They creaked open to reveal the near-empty space inside, leaving me curious about what exactly we were here for. Carlos gestured to a few crates near the back of the warehouse. "We need those transported to Miami. That's this week's job." As we approached the mysterious crates that seemed oddly out of place in such desolation, something foul caught our attention. An odor so strong we both gagged. Carlos checked his clipboard for any additional information about our cargo when his face suddenly became pale. His breathing grew shallow and quick as he blurted out, "I don't know what's in these crates right now, but let's get them loaded up and just get out of here." An edge of fear resonated in his voice, which felt unsettling and confusing. It only took 15 minutes to load everything onto the truck under the fading sky. We stood beside the truck, gasping for breath after exerting ourselves double time, a tinge of uneasiness still hovering in the atmosphere. Without a word of parting, Carlos hurriedly strolled back to his vehicle in an attempt to make haste from this location. I couldn't help but feel that he knew something I didn't. There was a reason he wanted to leave so urgently. As I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, a man emerged from behind one of the remaining stacks of crates, startling me. He wore an old tattered hat and an oversized ragged jacket to keep warm. His face was hidden by a long, unkempt beard, but there was still something recognizable, maybe familiar about him. This bearded stranger studied my truck intently, silently observing every detail. Then, as if on cue, he turned away and vanished behind the crates without making a sound. At that moment, history's chilling anecdotes raced through my mind. Whispers of serial killers who would stalk their prey methodically, or people who'd been abducted only to never be found again. The unease continued growing inside me like a poisonous vine, but I shook those dark thoughts off and reminded myself that what happened here wasn't any of my concern. It was time to leave. The drive began calmly enough, despite the relentless thoughts gnawing at my conscience. Those crates were hiding something sinister, It wasn't just unfounded paranoia. The man's unsettling features haunted my peripheral vision as I passed through a desolate stretch of road on this route covering hundreds of miles. Something struck the side of my truck with enormous force. It felt like it had veered me into a ditch, and if it had happened for another second longer, I would have keeled off course irreparably. My heart raced as if it were trying to burst out of my chest. Panic set in as I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, trying to regain control. I glanced at my side mirror, searching for the culprit behind this sudden impact. There on the road behind me stood the familiar figure of the bearded man, weapon in hand, expressionless and ominous, watching the truck lose control amidst his handiwork. I pulled over, deciding it was imperative to call for help. In a remote place like this, my signal was weak, all but useless. Frustration built up as I failed to establish a connection and dial the number. The stench of the crates in the back of my truck was overpowering, stirring an increasing sense of urgency. I deemed it best to keep driving while attempting to call for help periodically. The fear that my life was at stake grew with each passing mile, spurred on by the grotesque attacker's silent presence. That evening, as I pulled into a rural gas station for fuel, I noticed the smell becoming more pungent, almost suffocating in intensity. There was no way I could continue with these crates any longer. Mustering my courage, I fought against every instinct that screamed at me not to open them and creaked one open. The sight before me was absolutely gut-wrenching. Mutilated human body parts were amassed within the container. Limbs brutally torn apart from their owners lay jumbled together in a grotesque jigsaw puzzle. My stomach lurched, but there was no time to dwell on the horror before I sensed something coming from behind me. The bearded man seemed to materialize from the shadows as if they were part of him. His face contorted into an unnerving grin as he casually lifted a crowbar in his hand. He swung down toward me with brute force and deadly precision. However, thanks to my mounting paranoia, I quickly sidestepped his attack. The crowbar struck the ground with a sickening thud instead of its intended target, my skull. The air was filled with an eerie silence that settled between us as we studied each other's next moves carefully. Neither of us was willing to give away our tactics so soon, until the gas station attendant intervened, breaking free from our deathly trance-like state. I heard the attendant shout, "Hey, that's Nathan Wright. He's been on a killing spree for months. Call the police." Realizing the situation, I took advantage of a momentarily distracted Nathan and made my escape. As I sped off in my truck with the grotesque contents still in tow, I called the police, relaying every bit of information from the license plate to the unspeakable horror in those crates. The chase continued for days. Nathan knew I was communicating with law enforcement and was determined to stop me by whatever means necessary. We both maneuvered through dangerous obstacles and treacherous terrain. As night fell once again, sheltered by my surroundings, I pulled over to strategize how to visit justice upon this sadistic foe. No option seemed feasible without losing either myself or him. A sense of hopelessness set in as I wrestled with potential scenarios. Nathan Wright proved himself to be relentless, cunning, and intelligent, making any attempt at capturing him nothing short of impossible. Inconceivably, he managed to remain uncaptured while leaving a trail of death and chaos whenever he appeared. And it was clear that his bloodlust and heinous crimes were far from being satisfied. My last thoughts centered around victims, all those lost souls mutilated and butchered by this vicious monster. Nathan Wright may have slipped away for now, but his haunting visage and chilling grin will be forever etched into my memory. My resolve was unyielding, and an unsettling feeling twisted in my gut. This was not the end. It was only just beginning. One ordinary Monday morning, I climbed into my old rusty truck, ready to hit the road and transport some cargo across the state of Wyoming. My name's Eugene Brooks. I'm a simple man with simple pleasures, indulging in an occasional drink after long hours of driving on this lonely job. On this particular day, traffic seemed less busy than usual. There weren't many other truckers exchanging sarcastic jokes on the CB radio. I decided to take advantage of my break at a secluded rest stop nestled between the picturesque trees, stretching my legs and enjoying some peace and quiet. As I took a walk through the parking lot, I noticed something strange happening near one of the other parked trucks. Someone was meticulously applying duct tape to its exhaust pipe. The person looked jittery and unsure of themselves, giving me an uneasy feeling. That unsettling sensation overwhelmed me as I walked closer, realizing that this wasn't some harmless prank. A moment later, the person caught sight of me and immediately sprinted into the nearby wooded area. Unsettled by this unexpected event, but without adequate proof to call for help, I decided against pursuing them and just reported the incident to our dispatch support center. Little did I know that it was merely a prelude to what awaited me in the coming hours. As night began to fall, I continued my journey through winding roads surrounded by dense forests. Lulled by the monotonous hum of my truck's engine, only the beam from my headlights piercing into ever more menacing shadows kept me from slumbering. Abruptly halting my delirium was an unusual noise mingling amidst the familiar sounds of tires, crushing gravel, and thudding footsteps from behind my trailer. Swiveling my head sideways, I saw a shadowy figure clinging onto my truck with immense strength, one muscular hand gripping tight onto its edge. I panicked, but didn't dare slam down on the brakes, knowing full well the disastrous consequences. Instead, I swerved abruptly to throw them off balance. As my truck jerked violently from the maneuver, I heard a sharp hiss. They remained unbudgeted. Heart pounding in my chest, I pushed the gas pedal harder. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped through desolate stretches and dimly lit towns now enveloped in night's eerie embrace. The silent figure, disturbingly calm, clung tenaciously to my vehicle. To my relief, as we neared a town I knew had some police presence, the figure suddenly released its hold and disappeared into the darkness. Breathing heavily with adrenaline coursing through my veins, I finally felt some sense of safety, albeit an illusion. Without any proof of these terrifying events, and considering the thought that he might have hitched onto another passing vehicle by now, I tried my best to convince myself that it was merely a strange fluke. The next morning, I anxiously resumed my journey, my senses heightened after the harrowing events of last night. The radio murmured reports of a series of brutal attacks, with victims left maimed or worse. Chills spread through me as I questioned whether the mysterious figure was connected to these violent incidents. Traversing the roads with caution, I kept an eye on other vehicles and my surroundings. At one point, I caught sight of a fellow trucker named Harold pulling over to inspect his vehicle. As we had crossed paths previously, I decided to stop and give him a hand, explaining my suspicions about the unknown figure and its possible connection to recent attacks. Harold listened intently. "Eugene," he said solemnly, "I reckon I heard rumors about someone matching that description. A menace with unusual strength and brutality. Locals call him Blade Runner Billy." Nodding gravely, we agreed that we both needed to take extra precautions. For the rest of the day, I drove cautiously as Blade Runner Billy's reputation continued to fuel whispers of fear in each town I passed through. Eventually, night descended once more. The darkness outside grew thicker and more impenetrable with every mile covered. As hours wore on through a seemingly endless stretch of road, I fought to stay alert. I was suddenly jolted awake by the now familiar footsteps behind me once more. Eyes wide open in terror, I knew Blade Runner Billy had returned. Desperation took over as an idea struck me. Perhaps I could capture evidence of this sinister fiend so that authorities could finally put an end to his grisly reign. Carefully maintaining my speed and maneuvering the truck so it stays stable even on rough terrain, I sneakily pulled out my phone camera and tried to record what was happening behind me. The footage showed Blade Runner Billy clinging tightly to my truck like before. His face cruel and his movements sharp and efficient. The merciless mask he wore gave off an eerie vibe, and I couldn't help but shudder at the gory mess he had left in his wake. Deciding it was time to put an end to this horrifying ordeal, serving as living bait, I steered my truck toward the last town I had passed through, a place where police presence was known to be strong. Knowing the risk involved, I believed that capturing Blade Runner Billy would be worth it. The chase was unnerving, and my heart thumped wildly as I approached the town. With one final glance behind me, ensuring Billy was still on my tail, I pulled into a well-lit gas station filled with customers and nearby police. As planned, they immediately took in our appearance and began to encroach on Blade Runner Billy. Suddenly aware of the imminent threat, Billy flashed a sinister smile before vaulting himself off my truck and sprinting at breakneck speed towards the surrounding darkness. The police gave chase, but ultimately returned empty-handed. In the aftermath of that terrifying encounter, footage of Blade Runner Billy circulated among authorities as well as the media. Although I made it out alive and relatively unharmed, countless others weren't so fortunate. As for Blade Runner Billy, he remains at large, a heartless killer who could reappear anytime, anywhere, bringing terror along with him. Those who have survived him can only hope that someday justice will take a stand against this nightmarish figure, or that fate will finally catch up to him. But until then, dark roads will always carry whispers of danger lurking in their shadows. I was taking a deep breath, relishing the freedom of being out on the open road when everything got weird. My name's Albert Gibson, and I'm a truck driver who's seen every corner of the United States. An ordinary day cruising down a remote stretch of highway in Colorado. But as I would soon find out, this day turned out to be anything but ordinary. I had stopped to grab a quick bite at an old diner just outside of Denver. As I chewed on my burger, I overheard two locals talking about a series of strange incidents that had been happening in the area lately. It wasn't my business, but their conversation caught my attention. There was something unsettling in their voices. After my meal, I continued driving towards my next destination in Pueblo. It wasn't long before I noticed an unfamiliar car tailing me. At first I figured it was just somebody speeding, but after some time on the road together and multiple opportunities for it to leave or pass me by, I grew more suspicious. I contemplated calling for help but thought to myself, I must be paranoid. Nothing ever happens to people like me. Gradually, exhausting all logical explanations for why this car might still be following me caused worry to take root in my mind. As darkness approached and shadows swallowed the last light of day, I realized that despite my best efforts to shake them off with random turns and diverse speed changes, the car still stayed close behind me. Not once had it attempted to overtake me or pull off onto another road. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as my fear increased with each mile we traveled together. Suddenly, without warning, the car sped up and aggressively sideswiped my truck. The impact was intense enough to cause me to swerve out of control for a few terrifying seconds. Mercifully managing to regain control of my truck with only minimal damage, I was understandably shaken. The car had come to a stop nearby, and for a moment everything was still until the driver emerged. He was tall, unnaturally so, and wore a long trench coat that seemed to flap slowly as he approached in that eerie silence. His face was obscured by shadows, and I couldn't make out his features at all. In his hand he held something reflective and sharp, perhaps a knife or some kind of metal bludgeon. I knew I had to do something, so with my heart hammering in my chest, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator as hard as I could. The truck lurched forward, veering directly towards my assailant with terrifying speed. The man stepped off to the side, but not before narrowly escaping being crushed beneath the weight of my vehicle. Without any idea how or why this man had targeted me, but knowing that I would have lasted long if we continued down this path, I drove faster and more erratically than ever before in an attempt to shake him. My assailant re-entered his car, and the chase continued. Eventually, I noticed another truck stopped coming up ahead. It was my last hope for salvation. Surely there would be people there who could help me. As I pulled into the truck stop, I breathed a small sigh of relief. There were a few people milling about, and panic began to ease its grip on my heart as I hoped they might serve as witnesses, or even provide some support if things took a turn for the worse. I parked my truck, watching as the unfamiliar car slowly rolled to a stop nearby. The driver stepped out again, just as tall and shadowy as before. This time, though, he was holding what appeared to be a small hatchet. My brain was screaming at me to call for help, but something kept stopping me. The more I thought about it, the more uncertain and embarrassed I felt about explaining my situation. After all, what concrete proof did I have that this man meant me any harm? And so, with all eyes on me now, and an unyielding fear of appearing foolish or overreacting in front of these strangers driving my actions, I opted for Plan B. I approached one of the truckers who had stopped for their break and started talking to him about his day, trying to keep my voice steady. My new acquaintance seemed amused by our conversation, but willingly obliged me. It wasn't long before another trucker joined us, a woman named Sandra. From her weary expression came a first-hand account of the man in question. His name was Chester, and his actions had long been viewed with suspicion by members of the local community. According to Sandra, He arrived in town some months ago without any explanation and has terrorized people ever since. His method of choice: stalking drivers, primarily truckers like us, before attacking them in brutal fashion. There had already been several victims who confirmed Chester's uniquely disturbing tactics. It was grim confirmation of everything I had sensed since our paths first crossed earlier that day. Knowing beyond doubt the danger this man posed, and with fresh motivation fueling my decisions, Sandra and I quickly rallied those around us. We sought safety in numbers, pushing together the tables and chairs usually reserved for more leisurely breaks. The next hour passed in intense anticipation. Although we shielded ourselves from apparent safety within our makeshift barricade, Chester continued to stalk the perimeter of the truck stop with his hatchet in hand. He was relentless, unperturbed by our collective presence and determination to ward him off. At one point, he swung his weapon at an empty gas pump, leaving a nasty gash that served as a stark reminder of his intentions. We considered driving away, but there was always the risk that we'd be alone on the road, vulnerable to his ferocity once again. As night darkened, it felt as though hope for escape was fading fast. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chester seemed tired of this game of cat and mouse. He suddenly retreated back to his car without warning and slowly drove away into the surrounding darkness. Even as we exchanged strange smiles with those around us in supposed victory, I couldn't shake the uneasy sensation that washed over me. Our narrow escape was little consolation. Chester was still out there, free to continue his twisted reign. Not even my truck, normally a symbol of freedom and adventure, could offer me true solace from this knowledge. The open road ahead is now tainted by the chilling reminder that I have been unknowingly exposed to Chester's horrifying world, never knowing what horrors might continue to unfold beyond my line of sight. Wrapping up my reflection on these events here today, I remain haunted by one final question. How many other drivers like me might find themselves fearing for their lives before Chester's story comes to an abrupt, or better yet, satisfying end? Until that time comes and justice prevails, all we can do is pray that others don't cross paths with such a brutal and sinister figure while navigating life's unpredictable highways. The tapping on the window caught my attention as I parked my truck at a truck stop along the fringes of El Paso, Texas. My name is Bradley Murphy, an ordinary guy who happened to have stumbled into a truck driving career. Exhausted from a long haul, I needed to stretch my legs and grab some grub before catching up on sleep inside my little cocoon. The only place where I felt comfortable and cozy behind the wheel of my 18-wheeler. "What's up, Bruce?" I called out to my fellow trucker as he approached my window. Bruce Kennedy was one of those guys you always see around, but never really get to know beyond small talk. "You hear about that escaped convict making his way through these parts?" he inquired, visibly shaken. "Convict? Nah, I didn't catch any news lately." His eyes widened before he continued. "They call him the Night Stalker. He's been on some kind of killing spree across multiple states ever since he busted out of that high-security prison." Bruce glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. He gouges out his victim's eyes with his bare hands. It's like a sick calling card. I looked sideways at him and chuckled. Man, I'm not going to let some psycho ruin a decent meal. With that reassurance, we headed inside together for dinner. As we ate our burgers and fries in silence, I couldn't help but scan the front door every few minutes, feeling slightly more paranoid than earlier. Yet nothing seemed out of the ordinary tonight, just regular folks stopping in and out for their late-night sustenance. Once finished eating, I excused myself from the table and ambled towards the restrooms down a poorly lit hallway. Afterward, I washed my hands in haste and happened to glance into the mirror, only to catch sight of a tall figure in a bloody, tattered jumpsuit standing behind me. Panic seized me, my heart pounding in my chest. Without thinking, I lunged for the restroom door to make my escape. The night stalker lunged at me just as I narrowly escaped his powerful grip. I sprinted back towards Bruce in the main area, shouting at the top of my lungs to warn anyone who could hear. Bruce, this crazy guy, he attacked me. Bruce and a small group of patrons stared in shock, while a select few got up to confront the menacing figure, who followed closely behind me. As chaos erupted around us, a waitress tried to barricade herself inside a storage room with only a handful of other people. "Call 911, she screamed out, genuine terror clouding her words. Someone dialed their cell phone with trembling hands as we all huddled together, seeking refuge from the impending horror that was bound to follow. We held our breath in unnerving anticipation as we heard the echoing footsteps approaching our hiding spot. Suddenly, everything turned into a deafening cacophony of screams mingling with the horrifying noises of flesh being torn apart. I struggled to keep myself composed. We all teetered on the edge of sanity as we waited helplessly for what seemed like an eternity amidst the blood-curdling chaos outside. Reality slipped even further away from my grasp, leaving me reeling in disbelief at the gruesome acts of terror happening before my very eyes. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled that help was finally on its way. Would they arrive soon enough to save us, or would they come across another nightmarish crime scene? With every moment that passed, tension built within us as we braced for whatever fate had in store. The footsteps grew louder and more deliberate now. The night stalker knew we were close by and taunted us by tapping his nails against the wall. My heart raced within its cage. Cold, clammy sweat rolled down my spine. Then, without warning, the door burst open, and in stepped the monster himself. The night stalker stood tall and imposing, blood smearing across his gray jumpsuit and face. His dark eyes darted around the room, sizing up his victims. The man had an oddly muscular build and a crazed look, but nothing about his appearance gave any clue as to his motives or origins. We tried to make ourselves look smaller in hopes that our feeble attempt at hiding would save us from what we knew was coming. Desperate to survive, some people began attacking him with whatever they could find. Chairs, mops, even broken glass from shattered windows. However, these attempts only served to slow him down for mere moments. No matter what was thrown at him, he just kept coming. Eventually, the police arrived on the scene, but our hopes were quickly dashed. They entered the main area only to find themselves facing this unrelenting killer, who somehow managed to evade capture with brutal efficiency. I realized that waiting any longer in the storage room wouldn't change our fate, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. If we were to have any hope of survival, we need to move, I whispered urgently to the others. Although most of them hesitated at first, we eventually crept out of our hiding place as silently as possible. When we heard gunshots ring through the air, indicating the police were distracting the night stalker long enough for us. We scrambled towards the exit while trying our best not to alert him to our escape plan. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I could hardly breathe. Fear gripped me with every step forward. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the hallway behind us. The gut-wrenching sound nearly caused me to buckle and collapse right there, helpless and sickened by despair. Knowing others had succumbed to the night stalker's wrath carried a heavy weight on us, but we couldn't let it slow us down. We kept moving, praying we wouldn't cross paths with the monster, until we finally burst through the exit and into the cold night air. Away from the immediate threat within the truck stop, we hid behind parked trucks. We were in constant contact with 911, updating them on our situation and pleading with them to send reinforcements. A police officer approached us in a hushed tone, obviously trying to avoid the night stalker's attention. "What happened in there?" he asked quietly. We quickly relayed our horrific account as he updated his fellow officers through a walkie-talkie. Moments later, a news van appeared at the scene, broadcasting live coverage to the world. "Who is this guy?" I asked the officer as we watched SWAT teams surround the building. "His name is Robert Mason," the officer quietly informed me. "He's been on a rampage since being released on parole." The man exhibits remarkable intelligence and brutality. As more police and media swarmed around the scene, it dawned on me how this ordeal would be etched into my memory for years to come. Soon, the night stalker would be known all over the country for his terrifying actions that unfolded in El Paso. To our collective horror and disbelief, moments later a chilling scene emerged from inside. With chilling speed and agility, the night stalker was able to slip past responding forces right before their eyes. He sprinted out of sight within seconds, leaving only carnage in his wake. The search for him began anew. After we had our brush with death, I shuddered at what might come next. Tonight would haunt me for years to come, but worse yet, I knew he was still out there lurking somewhere, ready to strike fear into another unsuspecting soul. My name is Victor Sterling, and I'm a truck driver by trade. People think that my kind of job is dull and monotonous, but we truck drivers often imagine our own little adventures to keep ourselves entertained. Little did I know that soon enough I'd find myself in a real-life nightmare that would prove to be far more terrifying than any adventure I'd ever imagined. It all began during one of my typical runs through Las Cruces, New Mexico, while making a pit stop for gas and some snacks at a rundown convenience store. I noticed an elderly woman with a frantic look on her face. She appeared disheveled and kept glancing around nervously as if she was being watched. I tried to strike up a conversation, asking if everything was all right. To my surprise, she responded with both fear and urgency in her voice. "You need to watch out around here," she warned. "There's someone watching, waiting." With the urgency of her words still lingering in my mind as I reluctantly left to continue on my route, I couldn't help but notice the hairs on the back of my neck raising. My lasting impression was that possibly she wasn't fine. Maybe it was fear or confusion eating away at her sanity. The sun dipped below the horizon as I continued to cross the empty expanse of Desert Highway 70. A typical New Mexico night where one can't help but feel isolated from society. However, tonight it seemed as if there was an additional unease. the oppressive sensation that even with the radio turned up full blast, something sinister lingered just out of sight. The crackle of my CB radio interrupted my thoughts, catching me off guard as a deep voice started talking. It sounded distorted and disturbingly inhuman. Instinctively, I turned it off immediately. Could this be what that woman was talking about? Is this the one who's been watching? As the night wore on, the isolation only grew more suffocating, and the atmosphere seemed to grow heavier with each mile. Suddenly, in the distance, I spotted a car, seemingly abandoned on the side of the road. Its single remaining headlight slashed through the darkness with unnatural intensity. Unable to tamp down my curiosity, I hesitantly stepped out of my truck to inspect it. The steady hum of my idling engine suddenly felt like a lifeline as I nervously approached the vehicle. Upon closer inspection, I found an unsettling sight. There was a trail of what appeared to be blood leading from the driver's seat and into the desert, disappearing into obscurity among the sagebrush and mesquite. In any rational situation, I should have turned back at that very moment, but something compelled me further. An indescribable force pushing me forward into the desert night. As I stumbled blindly through sand and thorny plants that clawed their way up my legs, I gradually became aware of an unsettling sound. A faded scream carried on the wind, or perhaps only audible within my head. Still, I couldn't shake it off, nor could I ignore it. The sound intensified and started closing in on me alongside a presence. An undeniable sensation that someone or something was right behind me. The thought became reality as a figure stood in front of me. The maniacal eyes locked onto mine the whole time. I didn't think my body instinctively thrust a kick at him and took off running back towards my truck. I felt fear climbing up my throat and forming a scream as air passed through it more rapidly. As adrenaline rushed through every inch of my body, pain was lost in the ugly snickers behind me. Desperation urged me to reach inside the truck for something. Anything that can be used for defense against him before he catches up once again. As I scrambled for a weapon within the confines of my truck, I discovered a tire iron in the storage compartment. Gripping it tightly as I prepared for the worst, the malicious laughter grew louder and closer with each passing second, filling me with dread and a deep urgency to put distance between this man and myself. Knowing help was miles away on this desolate stretch of highway, I opted against calling for assistance. Instead, I clutched the heavy tire iron and steadied my breathing, trying to regain some semblance of control over my fear. As I peeked out from behind the vehicle, the twisted figure was gone, vanished like a ghastly phantom into the night. With no time to waste, I climbed back into my truck and put the pedal to the metal while speeding down the road. Beads of sweat began to form on my forehead, but not a single word escaped my lips. As night progressed into day, no further sign of that sinister figure appeared along my route. Upon arriving at the next truck stop, I began speaking to an old-timer who had seen his fair share of desolate highway mayhem. After hearing my harrowing story in exhausting detail, he gravely informed me of Trevor Walsh, a man suspected in a series of gruesome murders and mutilations along this very stretch of road. With my heart racing once again, it dawned on me that this man must have been close enough to reach out on my CB radio during our chilling encounter. Trevor Walsh had left a trail of death behind him, and now there was no denying that he had cast his malevolent eye upon me. Despite knowing the grisly truth behind the mysterious figure on Highway 70, nothing more came of it during the rest of my journey. Months passed without incident as my life returned to its usual pattern, until one fateful day when I found blood stains, indistinguishable from those that haunted me in Las Cruces, smeared on the door of my truck cab. As much as I wished to deny it, the brutal reality sank in. Trevor Walsh had not ceased his reign of terror, and perhaps he never would. He seemed to strike at will with motives known only to him. Maybe it was just a perverse game he played for his sick amusement. Each time I drove down those lonely desert highways, I couldn't shake the thought that at any moment Trevor could be watching me. Every shadow cast by headlights and every barely discernible rustle in the darkness rekindled my trauma and heightened my paranoia. Inevitably, it controlled my very being and left me wondering if I would be his next victim. The story ends now with more questions than answers as a predator eludes capture, while continuing to torment innocent souls attempting to carry on with their lives. Even now, as long days spent driving through arid landscapes blur into ever longer nights filled with haunting thoughts, I am acutely aware that someone like Trevor Walsh is always out there, lurking and waiting for their next prey to cross their twisted path. My name is Ryan Hunter, a truck driver from a small town called Autumn Bay in Maine. As much as I hate to admit it, I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to the strange and unusual. The trucker life can be pretty unpredictable sometimes, hilarious, sometimes frustrating, but never dull. Just like the time a deer caught me off guard when it tried to steal my lunch. Don't worry, the deer was fine. For my lunch, not so much. So last month, while I was driving through Wisconsin on my usual route, I came across a diner that seemed out of place among the vast farmland. The closest city was miles away. Yet this little retro-looking diner sat there like an island of civilization in the middle of nowhere. Having skipped breakfast and feeling my stomach protest loudly, I decided to pull over. Entering the diner felt like stepping back in time. It had this cozy atmosphere that gave me a nostalgic vibe. The waitress greeted me with an amused smile. "You look like a guy who missed breakfast." As I bit into the best burger I've ever had at any diner, I noticed something peculiar. A wall covered in newspaper clippings about missing people. What struck me was the similarity among the victims, all truck drivers who disappeared while on their route. Suddenly, at the corner of my eye, I caught sight of someone walking around behind the row of bushes outside. It was hard to make out any details from this distance, but they seemed to be drenched from head to toe in some viscous liquid. As curiosity got the better of me, I stepped outside to have a closer look, but found no sign of anyone or any bloody person for that matter. However, there was a faint lingering smell that reminded me of rusty metal, like blood, but no obvious source. The discomfort of what just happened began to creep in as questions raced through my mind. Was the person involved in a crime? Did I see something I should not have? But shaken by the encounter, I decided to get back into my truck and drive as far away as possible from that diner. I drove non-stop for hours, my mind unable to shake the strange encounter. Restless and fatigued, I pulled into a truck stop for the night and tried to catch some sleep. But just as I began drifting off, a tap on the window startled me. A chill shot through my veins as I saw a face right outside. The same face drenched in the red and brown liquid from before. With fear gripping my body and sweat pouring down my face, my trembling hands removed my seat belt as I scrambled to find my phone. The figure outside banged on the window, jarring me with each hit. Panicking, I found my phone and called 911, trying to remain calm while relaying my situation was impossible as the figure pounded on my window. My frantic breathing turned into soft gasps. The 911 operator assured me help was on the way and advised me to stay on the line. However, feeling trapped and defenseless in my truck, I could no longer maintain my grip on rational thought. In a desperate act of self-preservation and determination to face the threat, I opened the door and hastily made my way towards the truck stop building. Before I could reach it, the figure grabbed my arm. As we struggled, I could see his face more clearly, covered in old blood and dried patches of skin hanging from his cheeks. He looked like he had spent a lifetime causing harm. My free hand managed to swipe a wrench from a nearby toolbox. I swung it towards the figure's knee, landing a successful blow that sent him to the ground. Not wasting another second, I sprinted inside the building. As I locked myself in an empty storage room, I could hear him faintly mumbling outside. It sounded like he was reciting names of his victims, if my suspicions were correct. Some truck drivers entered the building, having heard the commotion and searching for its source. This situation became chaotic as people came to my rescue and confronted the bloody man. In an unexpected twist of fate, one of the truckers had a background in forensics and recognized that individual. His name was Walter Adams, formerly an infamous hitman wanted by multiple states for his gruesome crimes against innocent people. Before his disappearance in recent years, he had become known for attacking individuals that crossed his path along remote highways. The truckers reported Walter's location to law enforcement as they fought off Walter's retaliation. An attack focusing on their eyes with unnerving precision, as if he knew this would be their final strike before retreating when they least suspected it. Though ultimately unsuccessful in wounding any of us fatally, Walter managed to slip away into the darkness of the night before law enforcement arrived, leaving behind an eerily empty sensation. In the span of just a few days, my skepticism was replaced by true fear for my life and the lives of others in my profession. The sun dawned as officers and detectives cleaned up the site. Packed tightly with their files were newspaper clippings chronicling Walter's multiple transgressions against truck drivers like me. As I prepared to drive away from the truck stop, subdued whispers surrounded me. Whispers that painted their horrifying, but somehow absorbing guesses about Walter's idol and confidant, a monstrous being with a proclivity for such gruesome, shocking outcomes. The certainty of Walter Adams being in the shadows sent a wave of cold anger surging through me. He had retreated from our encounter, but had not suffered a loss. My newfound peers drew together in this realization, bound by our shared experience, and noted his victims, unknown faces connected by their shared occupation. With no doubt, fear would continue to haunt each driver who took to the roads at night. As for me, it seemed prudent to replace skepticism with vigilance and unending watchfulness for any signs of Walter's return. It It was an unusually balmy evening for autumn in Baxter, Iowa. As a truck driver named Derek Bishop, I've had my fair share of strange experiences on the road, but by far one of the creepiest occurred in this small Midwestern town. I'd been driving straight for hours, so when I pulled up to the practically empty truck stop, I was eager for a hot meal and a strong cup of coffee. The fluorescent lights of the diner welcomed me like a moth to a flame. Stepping inside, I couldn't help but laugh at an offbeat bumper sticker on one of the booths. "Honk if you love necromancers." In hindsight, maybe it should have been more of a warning than a light-hearted joke. My boots scuffed along the linoleum floor as I approached the counter and ordered from Penelope, the short-tempered waitress. She tossed me a half-hearted smile as she poured my coffee. "We don't get many visitors around here," she mentioned inquisitively. "It seems like that would make business difficult," I joked, trying to keep it light. She replied with a chuckle, "You'd think so, wouldn't you?" While I waited for my food, I noticed there were no customers around. Not surprising given how late it was, but it still added an eerie vibe to this place. Moments after my burger arrived, Penelope was gone from sight again, leaving me alone in this roadside oasis. As I took my first bite of heart attack-inducing food goodness, the bell above the door jingled softly as another man wandered into the diner. He looked disheveled and covered in filth. He had oily hair that hung low over his ghostly pale face and dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. He didn't order anything. He just shuffled over to a table near the back, occasionally shooting me unsettling glances before staring out into the dark parking lot. Unease grew in my stomach as I strained to identify any source of anxiety outside, yet there seemed to be nothing amiss. Some instincts must have kicked in because I quickly wrapped up my meal, leaving cash on the table while darting out towards my rig. I didn't even register the soft laughter of Penelope echoing far behind me. Back inside my truck, I cranked up the engine and double-checked that my cargo was secure. Minutes passed without interruption, but with every breath I took, it seemed like something didn't belong. That's when I spotted him again, the stranger from the diner. He was walking at a leisurely pace towards my truck, a grin plastered across his grotesque face. My heart racing, I slammed on the gas forcefully and roared out of the truck stop as fast as possible, trying to put some distance between me and that unnerving man. Every fiber of my being told me something about him was badly screwed up. The rearview mirror held no comfort. It only revealed a nightmare stalking me like prey. He wasn't running or shouting. He was smiling as if amused by my escalating terror. He wasn't even human. That's what kept haunting me. Despite flooring it, his figure remained in view for what seemed hours, until suddenly he vanished into shadows that hadn't been there a second ago. After fleeing the truck stop in Baxter, Iowa, and losing sight of the stranger, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was lurking around me. With a deep sigh, I decided to visit the local sheriff's office in hopes of gleaning some information about this mysterious man. I parked my rig outside the small, nondescript building and walked apprehensively toward the entrance. Inside, I found the sheriff sitting behind a cluttered desk, idly sipping on a coffee mug. He looked up curiously as I approached and introduced myself. "Name's Derek Bishop," I said hesitantly. This may sound strange, but there was someone at the truck stop tonight that just didn't seem right." The sheriff raised an eyebrow before slowly wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Oh, and what exactly about this person struck you as odd?" I recounted my experience at the truck stop, describing the stranger in meticulous detail. His eerie presence, his filthy appearance, and the unsettling grin plastered across his face. As I described him to the sheriff, I noticed his expression becoming increasingly grim. Once I finished telling my story, he nodded slowly and reluctantly, shared that there had been several gruesome attacks on travelers over the past few days. The only commonality among them was a description of a man, fitting that of the stranger from earlier. "They call him Lawrence Pike," he said solemnly. "I have been around these parts for ages. Nobody knows much about his past or where he came from, just his name, although people mostly try to avoid him." As unsettling as it all was to hear, part of me felt relieved to know I hadn't misjudged my instincts about this man, or whatever he is. Before leaving the sheriff's office and heading back to my rig, he warned me not to travel alone during nighttime hours in Baxter until further notice. His warning rang in my ears as I tried to shake off my fear, but I couldn't help but feel that this was far from over. I continued driving for several miles and eventually chose to stop for a rest at a different, slightly busier truck stop. As I lay in my sleeper berth trying to get some rest that night, the image of Lawrence Pike plagued my thoughts. Anxiety gnawed at me, making sleep nearly impossible. Just as I finally began to drift into a restless slumber, a sudden clanging noise outside jolted me awake. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered cautiously through the window, scanning the surroundings for any sign of what caused the disturbance. My breath caught when I saw him again. Lawrence Pike, standing just several feet away from my truck. His horrifying grin was even more chilling up close. The wind howled around him, as if sharing his malevolent intentions. In that moment, I realized there was no one nearby enough to call for help. And why would anyone believe me about this seemingly inexplicable phenomenon if they could hear me at all? Without another thought, I started the engine of my rig and barreled out of the truck stop once more, leaving behind the demonic gaze of Lawrence Pike. To this day, despite traversing across countless highways and encountering numerous truck stops along the way, there is no forgetting that haunting encounter in Baxter. It's a constant reminder that some threats in this world are real and lurking forever, waiting for their next victim. And somewhere out there, Baxter or elsewhere, Lawrence Pike is still grinning. My name's Benjamin Wallace, but people call me Ben. I'm a truck driver, and I've crisscrossed the United States more times than I can count. One aspect of my job that I appreciate is the opportunity to discover lesser-known American towns. One such occasion took me through Grimesville, a small, unremarkable town, but still home to some good folks. I was hauling a load of supplies from the East Coast, and it was around midnight when I pulled into Grimesville. The fatigue had settled in my bones, so I decided to grab something to eat from the local diner before finding a place to park for the night. As I walked in, I locked eyes with a peculiar individual sitting at the far end of the diner. A disheveled man around 40-something years old, maybe 6'3", with unkempt facial hair. He wore a dirty beige overcoat and emitted a pungent odor that wafted towards me every time he shifted in his seat. Despite noticing him immediately upon entering the diner, the man didn't seem particularly noteworthy until something outlandish caught my peripheral vision. In one swift motion, he discreetly slid what seemed to be a black trash bag under his table. With so many strange things that happen across this country, I've learned not to burden myself with other people's business. Shrugging off the oddness of it all, I took my spot at the counter and ordered a burger with fries from the chatty waitress named Marilyn. She could tell something was off and asked me if everything was all right. "Oh, it's nothing," I replied with an uncertain grin and reluctantly nodded towards the strange man. "Just wondering about that guy." Marilyn leaned in and whispered cautiously, "Yeah, he comes in here quite often at night. We're not supposed to feed him or anything, but sometimes I sneak him something small, knowing he doesn't have much." My curiosity piqued. Who could this man be that Marilyn felt pity for him? As I reluctantly munched away at my meal, my phone began to ring. It was my brother Vincent. We got to talking about the usual things: family, sports, latest movies we'd seen. But as our conversation winded down, we heard a loud thud behind us. The strange man had accidentally knocked out the trash bag from under his table in his haste to leave the diner. As he scrambled to pick it up and make a beeline for the exit, something fell out of the bag. It was an item so horrifying and repulsive that I nearly choked on my food. A blood-drenched lump of meat that appeared to be a human hand rolled onto the floor. Eyes widened, we all stared at it for a moment in utter shock and disbelief before anyone could act or react. The man grabbed it and sprinted out the door, disappearing into the night. The diner was awash with panic, and I knew I had to do something. I quickly finished my brother's phone call, saying, "Vincent, something's happened. I'll call you back." With that, I hung up and looked at the frightened faces around me. Not wanting to waste any time, I jumped into action. Forgetting about my fatigue, I exited the diner and searched for any trace of the strange man. The streets of Grimesville were poorly lit at this hour, but a faint trail of blood gave away his direction. I began following the trail and quickly realized that it wouldn't be as straightforward as I had hoped. He had seemingly taken a zigzag course throughout the town. Fortunately, as luck would have it, a police officer on night patrol crossed my path. As discreetly as possible, I shared what had transpired in the diner with the officer. He radioed for backup and suggested that we continue our search. Wordlessly, we proceeded cautiously through the deserted streets. After nearly an hour of chasing clues and dead ends, we eventually found ourselves in a warehouse district down by the river. The officer had received information about a suspicious man named Isaac Crane, who occasionally showed his face near this area. We split up to cover more ground, but remained within earshot of each other. A sudden yelp echoed through the night air. It came from my partner's direction. Alarmed but not wanting to endanger myself or others by shouting out loud, I followed the sound without raising an alarm. My instincts led me to a secluded alcove behind one of the warehouses. There lay the police officer on the ground, his throat slashed open with gruesome precision. The grisly sight forced me to question my investigation and its consequences. Knowing that calling for help would put more people in danger at this point, I decided against it. Instead, clutching my phone in one hand and a piece of broken pipe in the other, I continued to track the blood trail. It was evident that I had discovered something evil and dangerous lurking within Grimesville. Cornered and cautious, Isaac Crane's blood-soaked overcoat finally emerged from the darkness as I approached the edge of the river. In a moment of reckoning, our eyes met across the water. Suddenly, a chilling reality dawned on me. The man with the trash bag full of terrifying secrets could not be apprehended, for he was beyond any help or reasoning. His actions were fueled by a monstrous and insatiable urge for violence, which could not be controlled or understood. Gazing into his heartless eyes, I knew that doing anything but leaving Grimesville immediately would only result in more senseless and gruesome deaths. I stepped back from the edge with a nod to acknowledge this terrifying truth. Isaac Crane let out an eerie smile before disappearing into the dark abyss that was his twisted world. I knew that despite my efforts to find answers or justice for those unfortunate souls who crossed his path, there would only be more victims caught in his web of horror. As I returned to my truck, haunted by what had occurred and worried about what might lay ahead, I felt an overwhelming resignation. Somewhere within the shadows of America's forgotten towns were unspoken secrets too ghastly to comprehend, and unspeakable evils like Isaac Crane waiting to pounce. The sun crept up as I left Grimesville behind, knowing that no matter how far away or safe I felt in my travels, Isaac Crane's bloody touch would forever mar my memory, never completely erased from my thoughts. My name is Roger Patterson. I'm a truck driver for a major distributor in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Most people look down on my profession, but whenever it's Thanksgiving and they're stuffing their faces with turkey, they should remember they need guys like me to bring it to them. Truck driving is a job where you meet all kinds of people. But let me tell you about this one time when things got downright terrifying. It was an otherwise ordinary day, or a truck driver's equivalent of ordinary. Trucking along seemingly endless roads with nothing but radio static for company. I was delivering components for some computer store or something in Denver. They were running late, so to avoid the traffic, I had to drive through the night, which was downright exhausting. At around 2 a.m, I decided to pull over at a rest stop near some woods and grab myself some coffee. A chilly breeze accompanied by an unusual stench washed over me as I stepped out of the rig. It smelled unlike anything I had ever encountered before, almost putrid, but also oddly floral at the same time. As I walked towards the Rest Stop Cafe, I noticed this somewhat disheveled guy in the distance just standing there, keeping his eyes on me. He was tall and wore tattered clothes covered with stains that looked like more than just dirt. Deciding not to assume the worst about any stranger these days, I did my best to ignore him and continued on my way. I grabbed my coffee and started heading back to my rig when things took a turn for the worse. That guy, he'd appeared right behind me without so much as making a noise. Before I knew what was happening, he laid his hand on my shoulder with an iron grip. "Whoa there," I said, trying to sound more light-hearted than frightened. "Is that a new kind of handshake they're teaching out here?" The stranger didn't even bother with a response. He just gave me a nauseating grin that revealed what was left of his teeth, all rotted and caked with dried blood. A feeling of dread had washed over me, and I knew I had to get away. Using every ounce of strength in my body, I jerked free from his grasp and bolted towards my rig. My heart was pounding as I scrambled inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The man snarled and pounded on the window with his fists. Thud, 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 trying to break in, but the glass held tight. Desperate to get out of there, I started up the engine as fast as I could. Just as I was about to put the pedal to the metal, he threw his body weight into the side of my truck. The whole thing rocked like it had been slammed by an earthquake. Just then another truck pulled into the rest stop. The headlights illuminated a face so twisted with evil intent that even now it still burns into my memory, a grotesque combination of desperation and unnatural fury. Knowing I couldn't waste another moment, I gunned out of there with all my might. The maniac didn't follow. He just watched me drive away with an expression that seemed to say this wouldn't be the last time our paths would cross. And now, as I continue through some unfamiliar stretch of road after midnight, my worst fears are starting to prove correct. As I continued my journey towards Denver, the thought of the maniac wouldn't leave me. On a dreary evening, I spotted another trucker at a more crowded rest stop. Taking a chance, I approached him and shared my story. Surprisingly, he had heard of similar encounters in the area. According to him, the man was meant to be Dwight Stone, a former trucker who had lost his job and eventually his family due to his violent tendencies. Bereft of all that lent meaning to his life, Dwight's rage had consumed him, turning him into a relentless predator. He now targeted truckers at isolated rest stops. There had been many horrifying incidents reported across the country. Knowing that Dwight might still be hot on my trail, I decided not to call for help, as this would mean stopping just what Dwight Stone wanted. I confronted reality. This antagonist wasn't an abstract concept anymore. He was flesh and bone before me. As I drove on through the night, battling exhaustion and fear, I knew I had no choice but to confront my tormentor. Death lurked near either way. A few days later, after informing authorities of my plans and armed with a plan of action, I stopped at a quiet rest area. It was high-risk territory for Dwight Stone's sightings. It took only moments before he appeared from under the canopy of darkness that surrounded us. Eyes locked upon each other in familiarity and malice, we stood our ground. Dwight's appearance sent chills down my spine as decaying tissue hung from his exposed bones, and his skin was semi-rotted with gaping holes. The pungent stench he carried buried intermingled with the stale smell of blood on his clothes. With no time to waste, what transpired next can only be described as downright grisly. Restrained by ropes placed discreetly around him as he snuck up on me, Dwight struggled in futility to break free. I had tricked him, and now hell would rain upon him. "Remember all the truckers you've tortured, Dwight," I yelled out, staring down at him as he writhed against his bindings. There was no sign of remorse or humanity in his eyes. His soul had already withered away. Fueled by fears of retaliation, I unleashed my aggression upon Stone, the man who shared my profession, but instead chose to hunt and inflict pain on his unsuspecting brethren. I brutally attacked the monster just as he had done to so many others. Despite my vengeful rage, I knew that I couldn't end this by killing him. So much darkness already surrounded us. I wanted him captured and brought to justice, both for myself and for those he harmed before me. I dialed 911, no longer fearing Stone would hear me, and told them everything that had happened. As emergency services were dispatched, I watched over Stone's wretched form thrashing on the ground before me. Moments later, police swarmed the rest stop. However, as they neared us with pistols raised from their holsters, a sudden cloud of thick fog enveloped the area. Visibility was reduced to zero in an instant, and in it, Dwight Stone disappeared like a ghost. The officers swarmed around, searching in vain but returning empty-handed. Relieved that he was gone, but unnerved by how swiftly it had happened, I thanked the officers for their support and returned to my rig to resume the journey. Dwight Stone disappeared that night into the dense fog, near a remote truck stop along an endless road. That eerie encounter shall forever be etched in my memory, walking a hazardous path between sanity and madness, struggling each night behind the wheel, burdened by our trade's dark side, where monsters breed chaos. There's murder in the dead of night, and Dwight Stone has shown that the road is a magnet for such souls, survivors relentlessly chained to their pasts. As long as truckers tread these roads, the victims will become part of its history, scattered along this lonely stretch like clay more fragile than they realized. As I continue my drive through the endless nights, their stories haunt me, and I'm left with a spine-chilling feeling that won't be shaken off easily. And deep within me lingers the knowledge that somewhere down these twisted roads lies Dwight Stone, waiting for another chance to strike. It was one of those dull and dreary days, not quite rainy, but the air had a heavy dampness that lingered, making everything feel damp and cold. I had been driving my truck for hours through eastern Arkansas, determined to make good time and get as close to Tennessee as possible before finding a spot to park and rest for the night. As I continued down the road, I made an awful dad joke to myself. Why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7 ate 9. Chuckling at my own joke, I noticed that the sun was beginning to set. I passed by numerous diners and truck stops along the way, but there was something inside me that just urged me to keep going. It wasn't until I was too tired to drive safely that I finally decided to pull into a small, isolated rest stop off the interstate. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly normal about this rest stop. There were a few other trucks parked in the lot, but not many people were around. After stretching my legs for a bit and having a much-needed pit stop in the restroom, I climbed back into my cab with a cup of warm coffee from the vending machine. That's when things took an unnerving turn. As I reached for the keys in my pocket, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Across the parking lot, near one of those flickering street lights that you only see in scary movies, stood a man, or at least it looked like a man. His silhouette was large and bulky, with an oversized hood obscuring his face. He stood completely still, just staring at me from across the lot. Despite feeling uneasy, I tried brushing it off, thinking maybe he was another truck driver who had stopped to stretch his legs or smoke a cigarette. Shaking off the strange feeling, I started up my engine and settled down in my seat. A mere moment later, I heard a loud thud against my truck. My heart raced as I looked out my window, expecting to see the hooded figure. But he was still standing at the same spot as before, now accompanied by 2 others just like him. They all stood still in a row under the faint light of that flickering street lamp. Their faces remained hidden beneath those hoods. My hands trembled on the wheel when suddenly one of them dashed over to another truck parked nearby, jumping onto its hood and beginning to tear it apart. Metal scraping against metal in a deafening screech. Panicking, I turned on my headlights and blasted the horn, an instant imploring me to let out some sort of warning. The figures stopped abruptly and turned their heads towards my truck. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of one's face as the hood shifted. It was unrecognizable, only bloodshot eyes and ragged flesh, like something had eaten away at his skin with corrosive acid. My mind screamed at me to do something, but fear had completely consumed me. Clenching my teeth and telling myself that this was no time for cowardice, I slammed down on the gas pedal, aimed straight for those menacing figures, and let loose a battle cry roar as I barreled forward. All three assailants unsurprisingly leaped out of the way with extraordinary agility, but it was enough to banish them from their previous pursuit. Mirrors and windows shattered around me as they attacked my truck while I fled. Never would I have imagined that simple aluminum could be torn apart by human hands alone. As I sped down that desolate interstate, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I dared not look back until those faded street lights vanished from sight. Driving as fast as I could, I managed to put some distance between me and the rest stop. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms were slick with sweat. However, I couldn't afford the luxury of calling for help, because of the persistent feeling that doing so would only put me in greater danger, as if a predator would capitalize on my vulnerability. To survive this surreal event, I felt compelled to rely on my instincts and intuition. As the hours passed, and I vigilantly checked my rearview mirror, I found no sign of those hooded assailants. Eventually, my exhaustion got the better of me, and I had to find a place to rest. Pulling into an inconspicuous motel alongside the road, I quickly unloaded my belongings and locked myself inside. That night was restless and filled with disquieting thoughts about the hooded figures and their gruesome appearance. My mind was plagued with questions about who or what these beings were. The next day, after significantly building up my nerves, I headed into town to seek help. A local diner seemed like a good starting point to gather information, or at least encounter someone who might know something useful. "Excuse me," I approached the waitress cautiously. "Has there been any strange sightings lately? Hooded people or mutilated trucks?" The waitress hesitated before quietly replying. "You're not the first one asking about those things. People say there's some sort of hitman hunting specific targets with precision. Their leader is called Marcus Tyler." A small town cop overheard our conversation and intervened. "Listen," he warned me emphatically, "you don't want anything to do with them. They've brutally slaughtered several people around our town in recent weeks." With a newfound understanding of who these attackers were, hitmen led by a man named Marcus Tyler, I couldn't shake off an unshakable paranoia that spread like a toxic cloud. Perhaps I stumbled upon information I shouldn't have, or maybe I had unknowingly become a target for reasons beyond my understanding. There was little sense in involving local authorities in my plight, given their tight-knit allegiances. I was on my own. Heading back to the motel, I prepared to leave quickly, anxious to be one step ahead of these skilled killers. In the distance, I noticed something unnerving: 3 motorcycles with matte black paint parked nearby. My heart raced as I remembered the horrific images of the assailants last night. As night drew closer, I spotted one of the hooded figures outside. This time, however, he carried a bloody sledgehammer. His face was still concealed within his hood. He stood menacingly with an aura that demanded fear and respect. Suddenly, he swung the sledgehammer towards the nearby car with a force I couldn't fathom was contained in human arms. Metal crumpled and shattered glass flew through the air. An insidious chuckle cracked from beneath his hood as he reared up to strike again. I bolted back to my truck before they could see me and made a desperate attempt at annihilation. Though it seemed futile, I plotted my course out of town. As my tires screeched underneath me, stealing every ounce of courage within me, one thing was certain. Tyler and his malicious hitmen thrived on pure terror, and they had yet to complete their nightmarish task. Rather than racing into the horizon like before, it seemed inevitable that I would confront these creatures in mortal combat once more. But for now, I harnessed every thought for swift escape and prayed that luck would remain on my side, at least until I could decipher an effective method for eliminating the unsettling threats in pursuit. With a life-defying resolution casting its quiet storm just beyond reach. I was cruising along a seemingly endless stretch of Route 40 in Arizona when my truck's engine coughed, giving me an unpleasant jolt. Trying to ignore that nagging feeling inside me, I considered the drive as just another job, another destination, pushing the nagging sense of impending doom down and away. As the new kid in my small family of truckers, I often took the less desirable routes, the ones that took me through lonely stretches of highway where people rarely ventured. But this time, not even the light-hearted banter over the CB radio could save me from the increasingly heavy air of unease. It all began when I noticed an odd shape on my radar. It wasn't a typical blip from another vehicle or a recognizable landmark. Whatever it was seemed to be rapidly approaching my vehicle. The hair on the back of my neck stood on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out here on the interstate. Then it happened. A faint flicker in my rearview mirror caught my attention. Headlights. Thinking it might be simply another driver overtaking me, I focused on maintaining a steady pace while keeping an eye on those rapidly approaching lights. But something didn't feel right. They were calculated and kept their speed at an unsettling constant. As the car crept closer and closer, bits of memories flooded my mind. Snippets of conversation with other seasoned drivers about unexplained occurrences along this particular stretch of road. Tales of terror replaced any semblance of light-heartedness as rumors of a brutal murderer began swirling through my brain, tainting any attempts at humor with dark foreboding. Within minutes, I felt utterly cornered, unable to shake this stranger off my tail or pick up any help on the radio. All that remained was a pressing silence punctuated by tense spasms within my cab from engine hiccups. When those menacing headlights finally fell on my truck, my blood turned to ice. This car matched the wanted serial killer's black sedan, a dark, menacing vehicle with no license plates, a vehicular specter promising a gruesome fate. Before I could make any decisive move, the sedan abruptly swung out, joining me in the right lane and gradually drawing alongside me. My breath caught as I glanced at the driver. A man of indeterminate age and completely nondescript appearance, wearing a sickening smile that seemed drawn on by some sick caricaturist. Despite the horrifying vision of this man next to me, my survival instinct kicked in. Without waiting for further provocation, I pressed down hard on the gas pedal and felt my truck lurch forward with incredible force. The violent acceleration caused me to grip the steering wheel tight to avoid veering into him. The mysterious man in the sedan didn't even flinch. His head snapped toward me, and that twisted grin never faltered as he too sped up to keep pace with me. My rational mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. This person seemed to be toying with me. Was he responsible for my engine trouble, or was it just kismet that he appeared now? And what was his end game? As these thoughts sped through my mind like a runaway train, a spark of an idea formed. I remembered there was an upcoming exit not too far off. Maybe, if I could reach it before him and make an evasive maneuver, I could lose this menace once and for all. All semblance of cautious driving went out the window as I floored it, watching miles tick down rapidly until the approaching exit sign became visible. As the exit came into sight, my fingers clenched the steering wheel with desperation. I knew I had only one chance to outmaneuver this monster tailing me, and I was determined not to fail. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I counted down the final moments until my daring plan unfolded. 3, 2, 1. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, swerving onto the exit ramp at the last possible second. In the adrenaline-pumping chaos that ensued, I managed to slow my truck just enough to make a U-turn before gunning it down a side road, hoping against hope that I had left my pursuer behind. But my relief was short-lived, as the black sedan stealthily followed suit and continued its relentless pursuit. My heart raced as beads of sweat tripped down my face. I knew there had to be a reason why this man was after me, and I needed answers. Pushing my fears aside, I frantically dialed my older brother on my cell phone, praying he might have some insight or advice for handling this harrowing situation. "Brother," I cried out as soon as he answered, "there's someone following me. He's driving a black sedan with no plates. It matches the description of that notorious killer." My brother's voice cracked with concern as he asked for details about our current location, and if there were any safe places nearby where I could lay low while he called for help from local authorities. Feeling a glimmer of hope, I scanned my surroundings and spotted an old diner just off the next exit. Perhaps there would be friendly faces or even assistance within its safe confines. "I'll head to that diner now. Please hurry," I desperately shouted before ending the call and making my move. Swerving again into the parking lot of the dilapidated diner, relief washed over me as patrons casually sat outside, enjoying their conversations and meals. As I hopped out of my vehicle and rushed inside, panic-stricken, the waitress on duty approached me with concern. "Sir, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Between ragged breaths, I explained my situation and asked her if she recognized the man in the black sedan. Although she didn't recognize him, she quickly offered refuge while we awaited the authorities. Seconds turned to minutes, and each passing moment intensified my anxiety as the sedan remained outside, not giving up on its pursuit. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from my sister-in-law. She sent me a news article about the suspected killer known as the Midnight Hunter. His name is Gabriel Sharp. Reading about his cruel methods and seemingly unmotivated crimes sent shivers down my spine. There he was, grinning psychotically at passers-by, who watched him torment his prey with ease. I shared the chilling article with the diner staff, while we anxiously awaited a response from law enforcement. Huddled in fear together, we glanced up only to spot those malevolent headlights disappearing over the horizon. Inexplicably, Gabriel Sharp had given up on his prey, leaving more questions than answers in his wake. It was around 8 in the evening on a chilly autumn evening when this unnerving experience transpired. I'm Frank Morrison, a truck driver by profession, and quite a skeptic when it comes to the eerie and supernatural. At that time, I was puttering down a desolate stretch of road near Millbrook, Ohio, when my vehicle suddenly broke down. "Ah, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath while stepping out of the truck to inspect the issue. Ben Taylor, my best friend and fellow truck driver, was doing his rounds nearby, so I called him to help out. "What happened, Frank? Stuck in the mud again?" Ben chided me as he approached. "Yeah, real funny, as if filthy pants would bother me while on duty," I retorted with a smirk. It felt good to have him around, even though we were facing our own set of unique problems. Upon closer investigation, Ben confirmed that the truck needed some serious repairs and would take hours. Feeling stranded in the middle of nowhere, all we could do was wait for backup assistance from headquarters. However, soon our conversation turned morbid when we noticed an abandoned building just down the road from where we were parked. The place screamed creepy with its shattered windows and partially collapsed roof. As curious as we were to explore it further, a sensible sixth sense warned us not to venture any further. "It looks like it used to be a meat processing plant," I commented cautiously as I examined the dilapidated exterior. "I can't imagine what happened here." As we spoke about tracking down any possible leads regarding the building's enigmatic history, we continued hauling tools out of my truck, just killing time until help arrived. However, during this mundane task, we suddenly heard rustling sounds that cut through the eerie silence looming in our vicinity. We exchanged uneasy glances, but passed it off as an animal skittering through the underbrush. That was until we caught sight of a peculiar silhouette out of the corner of our eyes. Panic kicked into our system, and both of us started sweating despite the cold night air. The figure appeared quite tall, heavily built, and clad in an old blood-stained apron. At first, it appeared to be limping towards us, but soon quickened its pace with an unsettling sense of determination. Our instincts kicked into gear as adrenaline pumped through our veins. We scrambled back to the truck, yanking the driver's side door open. Terrified and unable to come up with a rational explanation for the man's violent behavior, we decided against confronting it directly, since we didn't even have so much as a wrench to defend ourselves. Instead, we mustered enough courage to shout, "Hey, who the hell are you?" The figure didn't even bat an eye at our desperate plea, simply seeming more determined to reach us. It was as if it acknowledged that we'd spotted its secret lair and now sought to silence us permanently. My heart pounded furiously in my chest, while fear coursed through me like electricity from a high-voltage wire. Part of me wanted to stick around and find out who or what this figure was, whether the person was in some kind of trouble and needed our help, or wanted a piece of the action himself. But my other half knew better than that. Ben appeared equally torn but had already made up his mind. "Frank, we can't stay here," he urged me with fervent exasperation while desperately avoiding eye contact with the relentless stalker closing in on us. "We need to get out of here." And so we hopped inside my broken-down truck, making space for each other on its metal floor while shouting for headquarters over our radio systems. As I forcibly tried cranking up my useless vehicle one last time, Ben had his eyes fixated on our tracker. The figure was growing dangerously closer with every passing second. His hands were clenched into fists, and he looked ready to pounce, as if anticipating the very moment when we let our guard down. regarding my decision whether to stay put in the misleading safety of my truck or flee barefoot through the desolated Ohio wilderness. I knew there wasn't much time left for me to choose. I swallowed hard as Ben trembled next to me, whispering frantically into his radio, while his eyes darted between the scene beneath us and the oncoming threat. With no other option, Ben and I decided to abandon the truck and flee on foot. It seemed like the best possible course of action, since it was dangerously clear that our mysterious stalker had no intention of letting us be. We darted away from the broken-down vehicle, our breaths gasping in the cold night air, and our legs pounding against the rough terrain as we scrambled for safety. We didn't dare look back, but we could hear the menacing thud of footsteps racing after us. It felt like the stranger would never relent, as if they were invigorated by our desperate escape attempts. Every time we thought we had gained some distance, those heavy footfalls were right behind us like an unwavering specter. Our only hope lay at a distant rest stop where we figured some semblance of civilization might be found. It wasn't much, a small cafe with a gas station attached to it. But in this unforgiving darkness, it seemed like a safe haven. Upon reaching the rest stop, we stumbled inside, alerting the few patrons present to our distress. Their eyes widened at our disheveled appearance, but they quickly offered their help without question. Between gasps for air, we related our harrowing encounter with the relentless stalker. A local named Jim whispered that he recognized what we described. "That's got to be Peter Morris. He used to work at that old meat processing plant before it went under years ago." Listening to Jim's anecdotes about Peter's troubling past only served to heighten our fear further. The man had had a horrific accident at work that left him permanently disfigured and mentally unstable, a fact concealed by his previous employer to avoid prosecution. As he recounted Peter's many unidentified victims who had suffered brutal deaths or grievous harm over these past months, any doubt we held over his capacity for violence evaporated like mist under the midday sun. Listening to Jim, it became painfully apparent that Peter was the embodiment of brutality and psychosis rolled into one twisted mass of flesh. He was a dangerous being, one who could not be taken lightly or negotiated with. His intentions had been deadly from the very beginning. Unable to rely on law enforcement to fend off Peter Morris, we decided to seek temporary refuge in the Rest Stop's diner. The people there assured us they would do their best to protect us from harm's way, though deep down we knew they were just as scared as we were. As the night wore on, we huddled close in the diner. Even with watchful eyes around us and steady hands gripping makeshift weapons, we couldn't help but feel powerless and vulnerable. The weight of the situation pressed down on us like an oppressive storm cloud as we waited for sunrise and an opportunity to make our escape. Yet with each minute that ticked by, our growing unease hinted at a dreadful revelation. Something was amiss outside in the cold night air, and when a sudden crash shattered our dozing vigilance, we realized just how dreadfully wrong we'd been to think ourselves safe. A bloody, mangled mess greeted us as we dared look at what once used to be the door to our sanctuary. And standing among that gruesome carnage was none other than Peter Morris himself. It seemed as if there were no limits to his wrath, his determination unwavering in pursuit of his prey. Our hearts sank in terror, but there was little time left for thinking or planning. Only crude instinct demanded that we fight or flee once more. As chaos erupted across the diner, I locked gazes with Ben. It felt like an unspoken agreement that neither of us could succumb here without trying until our very last breath. And so began a final desperate struggle for survival against a man who could not be reasoned with or stopped, and an abyss that seemed to stretch into forever. That night would become an everlasting memory marked by blood, pain, and despair, a story of tragedy barely left untold. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a shroud settled over the town of Carson Park, Illinois. I'm not usually one to let fear get the better of me. After all, I spent years as a truck driver zigzagging across this vast nation, encountering my fair share of oddities along the way. My name is Tyler Kennedy, and tonight was different, even for me. "Don't worry, Tyler," I muttered while locking my cab, trying to make myself feel at ease. "You've been through worse." An unusual scent filled the air, slightly metallic mixed with something pungent. The moon shone clearly in the night sky, casting eerie shadows on the cracked concrete lot where I parked my rig. I started to head to a local diner for some coffee and grub, taking slow strides past an unfamiliar alleyway. I stumbled upon a discovery that sent shivers down my spine. A shoe with some drips of what seemed to be fresh blood on it. Before I knew it, a blood-curdling scream from an unseen source shattered the silence. Frantically covering my ears, I looked around at every corner, feeling vulnerable yet unsure of what to do next. That's when something peculiar caught my eye, a figure draped in black making its way toward me. It looked like a man. However, there was something terribly wrong about him. A tall man with wide shoulders, slumped forward, and elongated arms swinging ominously with each step taken. My instincts told me to run for help or call for backup, but strangely enough, something within held me back from alerting others or making a scene that could bring trouble upon myself. The closer he came, his eyes gleaming with ill intent beneath an unkempt mop of greasy hair, his ebony attire stained by blood and some unknown filth beyond comprehension and imagination. As he reached within inches of me, a particularly rancid smell emanated from him. I knew calling for help in this situation would be irrational. It was too late to change anything. Why waste my energy on the inevitable? Does that make me a coward? Perhaps. A toothy smile then emerged from that demonic visage, as shudders shook my body. I studied his face clearly, not normal yet disturbingly familiar, bearing marks of violence. It dawned upon me, could it be him, the notorious Anthony Kane, infamous for his vile and sadistic crimes? The gruesome stories I'd heard about him floated in my memory. Ordinary people left maimed and terrified in his wake, their limbs twisted and distorted beyond repair. His putrid breath fanned across my face, sending beads of perspiration down my neck as he leaned in and whispered menacingly into my ear. "I've been waiting for you, Tyler." Suddenly remembering the blood-stained shoe and scream from earlier, terror surged through me like a tidal wave. In a feeble attempt to resist whatever terror Anthony was about to unleash, I swung my fist at him, only for him to catch it flawlessly. Trying to free myself from his vice-like grip, I struggled with all my strength. Hopeless and desperate, distorted laughter erupted from beneath the shadows, as Anthony raised his other arm high above us both. His arm came down with an inconceivable force, As I tried to twist away, the impact didn't bring the pain that I was expecting. It actually sent me sprawling onto the cold, hard ground, grasping at my senses and still reeling from the shock. He grabbed a nearby chain and lashed it across my back. The sudden searing pain brought me to my knees, dragging a guttural groan from deep within me. In fleeting moments of clarity, I desperately tried to find a way to escape this torment. I observed my surroundings and noticed a nearby garage toolbox. My mind raced as I formulated a plan. I could try to grab something from the toolbox, anything that might help me fend off this monster. Summoning every last bit of strength left in me, I launched myself toward the toolbox. As I glanced back briefly, Anthony followed my motions with slow, deliberate steps. My fingers closed around a wrench. As Anthony neared, with one swift movement, I swung the wrench at him. It connected with his head, and he staggered back for a moment, but quickly regained his footing. Realizing the futility of this fight, I turned my attention to finding help. If I couldn't finish him off alone, perhaps someone else could. As though reading my mind, Anthony locked his cold gaze upon mine. A twisted grin spread across his grotesque face before he disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. My whole body shook in fear. Was there any point in calling for help? By the time anyone arrived, he would be long gone. There were plenty of stories about people who went after Anthony Kane, but nobody ever caught or even wounded him significantly enough. I needed to gather any information on Anthony and maybe share it with law enforcement officers, at least. Approaching late-night pedestrians passing by, whispers of how they barely escaped his clutches filled my ears. The gas station attendant Sally spoke of how she had been attacked weeks ago, but somehow managed to free herself from his grasp. She tearfully showed me a row of stitches sewn across her neck. As days passed, the connections between these stories and the man I had witnessed solidified. The experiences of those unlucky enough to have encountered Anthony all mirrored my own, melding into an image of a monster that couldn't be defeated. I knew I had to do something to stop this cycle of torment for everyone who lived in this godforsaken town. But would that even be possible? With each step I took to expose this monster, it only seemed like a much more significant threat than before. Convinced by the alignment of facts and stories, I decided to inform the local authorities about Anthony Kane's existence in Carson Park. However, as I stepped towards the police station door with dread heavy in my heart, something eerie caught my attention. Deep footprints etched on the cracked pavement going around a corner. Tentatively following the sinister trail, I found myself back in the desolate alley where everything had begun. The footprints ended abruptly at the blood-stained shoe left behind days ago. Drenched with an overpowering sensation of dread, I knew there was no escape from Anthony Kane's grip on Carson Park. Though my steps were slow and cautious as I walked away from that terrifying place, my mind raced with questions. When would he strike again? How many more people would suffer before the town found out how to end their most dreadful nightmare? And then it hit me. Maybe Anthony Kane was not just one man, but an ever-growing representation of something much darker that lurked within Carson Park. Something that could never be fought nor contained, but was only anticipated with terror by every person who inhabited these streets. And so it goes on as Carson Park remains haunted by the shadowy presence and actions of Anthony Kane. Their residents continuing to live in fear, the horrifying truth sinks into their souls. Their so-called safe haven is tainted by an evil that cannot be vanquished, and they must accept that they are all potential victims of this vicious predator. My name is Marcus Reed, and it ain't every day you find yourself at the center of a real-life horror movie. It all began at a truck stop off the interstate in Amarillo, Texas. I just finished refueling my 18-wheeler and was looking forward to a hot meal and a cold beer before hitting the road again. I loaded my burnt coffee into the truck cabin and climbed up, sighing in the familiar embrace of my worn driver's seat. I caught a glimpse of my friend Dean Thompson, another driver we'd met a few years back during some downtime between hauls. He was walking over with hands cupping 2 cups of steaming coffee and chuckles, floating through the air like cartoon speech bubbles. "Hey Marcus, ever hear the one about the truck driver who forgot to put on his clothes before weighing in?" he asked with a grin. I chuckled, shaking my head, and said, "Nope, tell me." Well, he turns to his co-driver and says, "Oh no, it looks like our weight is in the nude zone." Dean burst into laughter at his own joke. "Nice one," I laughed as we both sat in our respective rigs. As we chatted about our upcoming routes, and small talk turned to favorite restaurants en routes across Interstate 40, I noticed someone watching us from afar. I couldn't make out his features from this distance, other than his long silhouette framed against the distant setting sun. He stood there motionless while we continued unknowingly with our conversation. Well, when I turned back to face him again, after sharing another anecdote with Dean, the stranger vanished. Unnerved, but thinking nothing much of it just then. After all, we come across strange people all the time during our hauls. Dean and I agreed to meet for dinner at our favorite diner, just off exit 15 in Little Rock. We shook hands, and I got back onto the freeway with Dean trailing a little behind me. As I made my way down the freeway, I couldn't quite shake off that odd feeling of being watched that began to seep into every corner of my mind. A couple of hours later, having had a good time, Dean and I were sitting in a booth at the diner, checking out the menu. The local decor coated the walls with vintage signs and antique paraphernalia. We both ordered our respective comfort foods, burgers for me, while Dean got himself a meatloaf dinner. As we enjoyed our meals, Dean devouring his plate with gusto, it was hard to ignore what unfolded next. The air chilled as everyone witnessed another patron entering the diner. It was none other than the stranger from earlier who had been watching us. He seemed devoid of emotion, sporting unkempt facial hair and ruffled clothes. This strange man locked eyes with me in a gaze so cold that it sent shivers throughout my body. He stopped in front of our booth for a moment that felt like eternity before proceeding toward the restroom in silence. Without thinking twice, I whispered to Dean about the encounter at the truck stop earlier and how unnerving this entire situation felt. Clearly not one to shy away from confronting strangers. He quickly finished his meal and walked towards the restroom as well, intending to question who this ominous figure is, or even just tell him off real good. Once he stepped out, I kept my eyes on each and every soul leaving the restroom after Dean went in. But after about 10 long minutes of scrutinizing each departure, he never emerged from the recesses of that sleepy diner's restroom. However, friend or foe alike seemed to. I decided I couldn't wait any longer and that I needed to check on Dean. I stepped carefully through the diner, finally arriving at the restroom door. Turning the knob, the door creaked open to reveal a sight that made my stomach churn. Blood decorated the walls like twisted pieces of artwork, and bits of gore were scattered across the pristine white tiles. Dean's lifeless body lay in a heap in one corner, his face beaten and contorted unnaturally. My heart thumped hard in my chest, and I stifled a scream as tears streaked down my face. I knew I had to call for help, but my hand shook so violently that I fumbled with my phone until it slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor. My legs buckled and gave out beneath me, and I crumbled helplessly onto those same blood-stained tiles. An employee found me a few moments later, shock setting into their features almost instantaneously. Others soon followed, gasping in horror at the hellish scene before them. In a matter of minutes, the police arrived and questioned each witness individually. Silent tears fell from my eyes as I choked out an account of our unknown attacker's presence at both the truck stop and diner. The police combed over every inch of the crime scene, while other patrons whispered amongst themselves about what could have motivated this heartless killer. A few even speculated that he was impossibly skilled at blending in among us. It was then that a frightened diner staff member mentioned an odd customer, giving off sinister vibes earlier that night. Their story matched my description of our murderous stalker, unkempt facial hair and all. Leading Detective Sanders introduced himself as the lead investigator on similar cases in neighboring states where grisly murders had been committed by someone they believed was connected, a man named William Frost. He informed me that William Frost had managed to evade capture due to his unpredictable MO and the gruesome nature of his crimes. It was clear to me now why I felt such an inexorable dread about this person. He wasn't human. He was an embodiment of evil, leaving a trail of destruction wherever he went. Detective Sanders requested my contact information to keep me informed on the investigation. He reassured me that everything would be done in their power to bring William to justice. I nodded silently, my voice stolen by shock and grief. With no other options and not wanting to risk facing William again, I took a couple of days off from driving. I missed Dean more than I could put into words, but life had to continue despite feeling empty without my friend by my side. One day, while checking my mail, I received a letter containing newspaper clippings of William Frost's latest murders. The envelope had no return address. Paranoia engulfed every part of me as I began to realize that he was watching and sending me a message. It wasn't over. Clinging to anger at the life William stole from Dean, I became obsessed with staying alive. Each gruesome memento pushed me further into a vigilant state, never letting my guard down and constantly looking over my shoulder. Since then, years have passed, and I've continued living a life tainted by fear and paranoia. But in the distance, still lurking out of sight, but ever present in my mind, is the knowledge that as long as William Frost roams free, death is only a step behind. As I picked up my coffee and glanced at the clock, I sighed with relief. Truck driving could be monotonous, but it paid the bills, and I enjoyed its perks like seeing new places in the U.S. My name is Robert Collins, a weird name I know, but my friends called me Bobby. Today's drive was unlikely to offer anything new, as I had made the trip through this part of rural Alabama 100 times before. "Hey Bobby, trying out that gas station sandwich again." Fred, my fellow trucker, chuckled before hopping into his truck and heading off on his route. I rolled my eyes. I can't help it. These sandwiches have an inexplicable hold on me. He laughed and waved goodbye, muttering something about how he'd never understand my taste in food. As time passed, the picturesque landscape shifted from verdant greens to vibrant oranges and reds, signaling the arrival of autumn in all its glory. From mountain vistas to open plains with seemingly endless horizons, both banality and wonder existed simultaneously. I pulled into a rest stop where an old wooden house stood in disrepair next to a pond that had turned stagnant. The hair on my arm started to stand on end. There was something unsettling about this place. "Nobody's picked up that old place yet," I said into the radio. Fred replied, "Nope. It might cost more to make it habitable again than to tear it down and start anew." I watched the house for a moment before getting back in my truck to continue my journey, nothing more than a prior curiosity. It wasn't until I approached a small town that everything changed. Across the street from an old convenience store, overlooked by an antique water tower, stood a woman draped in rags, screaming with terror as she tried to escape her captor, who held her by the arm tightly. My heart thundered in my chest as I pulled the truck to a screeching halt. What had started as an ordinary day was suddenly thrust into chaos. The man holding the woman captive was large, heavily tattooed, and clearly deranged. His eyes were wild, and his mouth twisted into a terrifying grin. "Do something," she wailed, looking straight at me as if pleading for her life. I grabbed my tire iron and charged at the man, hoping to catch him off guard. He released his grip on the woman's arm, and she crumpled to the ground. In a blink of an eye, he turned to face me with a fierce gaze. His teeth clenched in fury, and he smacked the tire iron out of my hand with remarkable speed and strength. I managed to get one punch in before everything went black as his fist connected with my face. When my vision returned, I found myself trapped inside a small cage constructed of rusted metal bars with an old padlock holding it shut. My wrists and ankles were bound painfully tight with coarse rope. There were others too, dozens of them. Men and women of all ages trapped in their own cages, scattered across a dimly lit warehouse. Some were moaning in pain or crying softly, while others stared blankly ahead in shock or resignation. I struggled with my bindings, but quickly realized my efforts were futile. I whispered to the young man confined beside me, "How long have you been here?" "Days," he replied weakly, his voice drained of hope. "He never talks. He just comes in and takes one of us away. They never return." I glanced around and noticed a figure emerging from the shadows, stopping at each cage before selecting a whimpering victim huddled at the back of their enclosure. The faint scent of petrol filled the air as we heard a chainsaw burst into life outside our confinement. Blood-curdling screams joined the cacophony as the madman began his methodical, brutal work. As he approached my cage, I braced myself for what could be my final moments. The figure continued moving from cage to cage until he reached mine. He paused for a moment, his cold eyes analyzing me, but instead of selecting me, he moved on to the next one. It seemed that he had other plans for me, whatever they may be. As the days passed, and the fear inside me slowly began to consume every bit of reason, I could think of only one way to get out of this nightmare alive. I needed to make a plan before it was too late. It took intense observation and even more risk, but I finally figured out a daily routine that our captor followed. He was thorough in his rituals, and what little predictability I could find was the only hope for an escape plan. With great care and precision, I started loosening the knots around my wrists and ankles. I knew that as long as our captor didn't notice my progress, I'd be able to get free in due time. My fellow prisoners seemed either too afraid or too defeated to try anything themselves. When they saw what I was doing, some stared with a flicker of hope in their eyes while others glanced away, as if trying not to draw attention to my actions, fearing the consequences if we were caught. After several days of this subtle struggle against my bindings, finally, when our captor left the warehouse momentarily for his work, I slipped free from my rope restraints. Upon freeing myself from captivity, I managed to move carefully and quietly through the dimly lit space full of victims past and present. The horrid stench grew stronger with each step, as blood stains littered the floor from those who had perished at our captor's hands. I knew that my window for escape would be small. There was no time to get everyone out or even comprehend what I had just walked through. Every second counted. With my heart pounding wildly in my chest, fearing for both my life and those that would remain behind, I sprang towards the doors to make my escape. But first, I needed keys. Almost miraculously, I found a set hanging from a hook on the wall near the exit. I took them, knowing that this hasty attempt could be my last chance to make it out alive. Dodging any possible squeaky hinges, I slowly pushed the heavy doors open 1 millimeter at a time. With my heart pounding so loudly that it felt as if it would burst through my chest, I slipped through the crack and out into the night. It's a dreadful reality to know that countless others remain trapped inside. But once I was a safe distance away, hiding behind trees and bushes alongside the building, I took out my cell phone and hesitantly dialed 911, praying that they would arrive quickly enough to save my fellow captives before our captor noticed my escape and retaliated on those remaining. Days later, after recovering in the local hospital from the harrowing experience, investigators informed me that they had arrested a man known as Marcus Vale. Fueled by rage and pain from his abusive childhood and numerous mental illnesses, he targeted innocent passersby in his demented pursuit of power and control over others' lives, while acting out complex yet senseless violence. But even as police assured me, he was behind bars awaiting trial for his crimes. An uneasy feeling plagued me. The unsettling thought that perhaps Marcus had associates working alongside him. My suspicions proved true when the news reported that Marcus vanished from his cell, without a trace, only days later. Knowing he was still at large, searching for his next victims, left me with sleepless nights and constant dread. Rather than being free from this nightmare after making my great escape from that warehouse of horrors, I instead find myself forever haunted by the fact that Marcus Vale is still out there, and he could be watching any one of us from afar. My name is George Lancaster, a truck driver by trade. The life of a trucker can be pretty boring at times, but that all changed when one particular job led me to an encounter I'll never forget. Driving through the desolate dirt roads around a small town in Kansas was strange enough. Aside from the crooked sign that welcomed visitors with an unsettling creaking sound and the unexplained drone of cicadas rising from the fields, it felt standard enough. The first oddity occurred right as I parked my rig outside the local diner for a decent meal. A fellow trucker, whose name I can't remember now, uttered something disconcerting under his breath just before walking away. Dead bodies round here seem to collect more scars than memories. He trailed off with a shiver and quick left. I brushed off his cryptic warning as nonsense, expecting fatigue to take its toll on him. Chuckling, I thought about one of my favorite jokes. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. That one always seemed to lighten the mood when truck stops got weird. As evening fell, I hit the road again. It wasn't long before something unusual caught my eye. A glint of light at a seemingly abandoned farmhouse in the distance. Oddly compelled to investigate, I pulled over and made my way towards it. The moonlit gravel crunched underneath my boots with each step until I reached the property, only to be greeted by numerous rotting doors lined up against the decaying wall. "That's peculiar," I whispered before hearing faint cries coming from behind one of them. Help somebody, knowing someone might be in danger, played on my conscience. Although Littleton seemed like the last place such things would happen, something compelled me to pry open one of those doors. As soon as it tore free, it unveiled a man whose arms were bound tightly behind his back, tape stretched grotesquely over his mouth. He collapsed at my feet. "Who did this to you?" I asked in panic as I began untying the man. My heart raced as things took a sudden dark twist. He gasped. I didn't get a good look at him. He wore a hooded shirt, and "Please, you need to call for help." My phone signal was infuriatingly weak. With no other option, we had to return to my truck. As we hastily moved towards it, rustling erupted from the tall grass around us. Our panic intensified, and once more I cursed my feeble phone signal. We paused in our tracks when a figure stepped into view. A hooded man with an eerily calm expression on his blood-spattered face. The light of the moon reflected menacingly off the jagged hunting knife he clutched in his hand. "So you thought you'd steal my prey, huh?" He sneered before charging at me with blood-curdling fury. Fumbling through my pockets, I managed to pull out my trusty pocket knife, just in time to parry the blow. We struggled violently, desperate cries mixed with frenzied grunting, as each of us jockeyed for control in the precarious moonlit battle. Through sheer survival instinct, I swung at him with all my force but missed, only managing to slice off a chunk of his hood. The man reeled back in anger before regrouping and raising his weapon high above his head like an executioner. As weapons clashed again and adrenaline surged through my veins, I realized that putting an end to this grisly affair was beyond outlandish. Not just improbable, but perhaps even impossible. This hooded figure was far from normal and had no intention of stopping his heinous acts, ready for another bout that was sure to push me to the brink. We continued our desperate dance of death, locked in a battle I knew was far from over. In the midst of our struggle, a police siren pierced through the night, approaching our location at lightning speed. The hooded man hesitated for a moment, then dashed into the darkness as if disappearing into thin air. I exhaled deeply, the knife still clenched tightly in my hand. The sudden arrival of the authorities gave me an opportunity to help the man I had rescued. With law enforcement's assistance, we managed to get him medical attention and report our findings on this twisted situation. Over the course of the next few days, the town was in an uproar. Murders and kidnappings had been taking place for months under everyone's noses, all committed by one man named Oliver Ross, chillingly nicknamed the Phantom of Littleton. As horrific details emerged from his hidden cellars, underground chambers, and makeshift surgical theaters on his property, one thing became crystal clear. This was no ordinary killer. The police were unable to apprehend Oliver. He was always 2 steps ahead of them. His impressive intellect and ruthless nature made him a formidable, elusive foe. Despite the ever-present danger that loomed over us, I couldn't abandon Littleton just yet. Knowing that my time served as powerful leverage against this vile criminal, I made it my personal mission to ensure he would face justice. Working tirelessly with law enforcement and community members who refused to cower in fear like their neighbors were doing, we pieced together his grim tale. He was a man filled with insatiable hatred and a thirst for vengeance, following his own traumatic past of abuse and neglect in Littleton. Driven by loathing for those who hadn't intervened in his years of suffering, Oliver turned his pain into something disgusting. A twisted career that aimed to outrun anyone who tried stopping him from torturing those he deemed appropriate victims. We also discovered other victims who had been held captive like the man I had rescued. Although some were injured, they were grateful to have escaped from Oliver's clutches alive. As the frenzied days passed, I received a terrifying, taunting letter at the motel where I was staying, penned by none other than Oliver Ross himself. The letter sent shivers down my spine and confirmed my worst fears. Not only did he know who I was, but he also declared our fates entwined in Littleton, until one of us drew our final breath. In that moment, I knew that the battle for survival between Oliver and me was far from over. The resolution to be rid of this murderous psychopath consumed me. However, no matter how much evidence we gathered or plans we concocted against him, Oliver evaded capture. The last time I saw Oliver Ross was during a climactic showdown on the roof of an abandoned industrial building. Our conflict was intense and brutal. Both of us were entirely focused on overpowering the other. As we fought on this unstable structure, it began to collapse beneath us. Recognizing that he would be at a disadvantage in the rubble-filled ruin below, Oliver retreated once more into the shadows. Despite having suffered significant injuries during our battles and fearing his next move would come at any moment, I decided to continue trucking because staying paralyzed by fear wasn't an option. My path through life was now intertwined with the goal of ensuring Oliver would face justice for his atrocious acts. So I made a pact with myself. Wherever my wheels took me, however far or wide, I would never stop searching for him. The temperature had dropped uncomfortably, announcing the impending arrival of winter. I tipped my trucker cap to the waitress at the truck stop diner and made my way back to my rig, named Big Thunder. I checked a message on my phone from my wife Lisa, wishing me a safe trip back. As I hopped into the cab, "Hey Rob, I hope you're doing well, probably on a quick break," muttered Steve over the radio as I cruised down US Route 32. He was trucking in the opposite direction, about 60 miles away. "Hey man, just passing by Pikeville. You know anything interesting about this place?" I replied. Steve chuckled briefly with familiarity. "Oh, Pikeville, you're in Blair Witch territory, buddy." We both shared a laugh and agreed to reconnect as soon as I was done with my route. Night had crept in once I headed northbound toward Hagerstown, Maryland, and the atmosphere felt heavy. A dense fog enveloped the road, obscuring a significant portion of what lay ahead of me. With increased caution in my driving, I decided it was time for a little pick-me-up. A joke with my dispatcher. "Hey Jim," I said into my radio receiver. Why couldn't the bicycle stand up by itself? After a brief pause, he grumbled back, "All right, Rob, why?" "Because it was too tired," I replied with a hearty laugh. Jim groaned in response and went back to managing his fleet of drivers. It wasn't long after that conversation that things started to take a strange turn. The radio began cutting in and out periodically. Local transmissions were breaking through. News reports about an escaped murderer named Kevin Murphy. The story piqued my interest. They described him as dangerous and unpredictable, targeting victims indiscriminately. I spotted an odd silhouette about 100 feet up the road, emerging from the fog. As I got closer, I saw a man standing in the middle of the lane, motionless. He was drenched from head to toe and visibly shivering. I couldn't just leave him stranded, but I would approach with caution. I stopped Big Thunder and approached the man through my partially lowered window. "Hey buddy," I said, trying to sound friendly, noticing his visibly desperate state. "You need some help?" The man slowly turned, pale as the fog that surrounded us. "Please, can you help me? There's been an accident." Skeptical but curious, I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and followed him. The air felt colder than ever as we continued into the murky mist. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this a prank? Could this be related to the elusive escaped murderer? An overturned car soon appeared ahead of us, steam rising from its engine like an eerie apparition. Panic washed over me as we approached. What if there were injured passengers inside? Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind us, echoing through the dizzying fog. The strange man was gone. He had vanished without a trace. A murmur of distress ripped through my mind, and I found myself frozen on the spot as my heart pounded heavily in my chest. I glanced around one last time and decided it was time to leave now. Without looking back at the wrecked car or seeking the vanishing man in distress, I hastily made my way towards Big Thunder. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I sprinted back to my trusty rig, my heart racing as the fog swirled around me. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door shut, scanning the area to make sure I wasn't being followed. I decided to call for help. I needed someone nearby who could explain this mysterious situation. My shaky hands grabbed the radio and I tried to contact Steve. "Steve, are you there? Something's really wrong here," but static persisted and I couldn't get through to him. I knew something had happened, not just to the man who had vanished, but also at the accident scene. The gruesome evidence made it clear. As I sat there contemplating my next move, a swirl of fog revealed a face staring at me from within the trees. Kevin Murphy, the escaped murderer. My heart pounded with fear, knowing he was out there and could strike at any moment. With no way of calling for help, I decided on a very risky plan, hoping to protect myself from this highly dangerous individual. I searched my truck for anything useful. Among my tools, I found a heavy wrench that could serve as a defense weapon. But before deciding what to do next, a bush rustled by my window and caught my attention. Seconds later, an injured woman emerged from the thick fog. Blood soaked her shirt as she limped painfully towards me. "Please find help," she managed with difficulty before collapsing onto the cold pavement. I hurriedly stepped out of my cab, gripped the wrench tightly, and cautiously approached her. As she fought for consciousness, every second counted now. If Murphy were anywhere nearby, he'd strike without warning or hesitation. Although there was no time to waste on inner doubts or emotions, fear coursed through every inch of my body. My legs carried me as swiftly as possible toward a nearby town, barely visible through the fog. I pounded my way through the door of the first lit building I encountered, a small convenience store. "Someone please, there's an injured woman on the road," I shouted desperately, looking around at the bewildered faces staring back at me. Their expressions revealed that they knew it was related to Murphy, the murderer they had heard about for days. The store owner, without hesitation, picked up his phone and called the police. As he explained the situation, the locals decided to band together and help protect their town from Murphy. They armed themselves with whatever was available: baseball bats, fishing nets, and hammers, quickly giving them an idea of where we had come across the wrecked car. We began searching the area with extreme caution. The fog continued to prove a formidable enemy as it concealed Murphy's whereabouts. A scream suddenly tore through the air several yards away. Panicked and running on raw instinct, I rushed towards it, clutching my wrench for dear life. What met us was a chilling sight. An already dead young man, his throat brutalized by a knife with precision that unnerved me. In a matter of seconds, he had been taken from this world without warning or mercy. Though we wanted to mourn for him and remember him as no different from ourselves, someone who just wanted to live another day, we couldn't afford that luxury. Only one thing mattered now: finding and stopping Kevin Murphy. We continued our ruthless search through thick fog and despair, determined to protect our community and bring peace back to our lives. The days felt like an eternity as fear gripped our hearts tighter and tighter. As more victims fell prey to Murphy's violent rampage, it became clear that we were dealing with someone intelligently sinister, a person who seemed to know our every move before we did. Finally, after hopeless searching and harrowing encounters with tragedy after tragedy, we stumbled upon a hidden lair in the woods containing evidence of Murphy's unspeakable misdeeds. As we cautiously scoured the area, the dreaded realization crept up on us. Kevin Murphy had quietly observed every one of our movements and had been waiting for us here in his secret nest. Despite this chilling revelation, Murphy himself remained elusive, ever present but never seen. His cold gaze seemed to pierce through the trees, watching us as we grasped for any semblance of hope. And in the final moments when it mattered most, he slipped through our fingers like fog dissipating upon a summer breeze. Everything seemed normal that day, just another lousy Thursday. My name's Clifford Barkley, a truck driver by profession, and I reside in Boise, Idaho. I picked up my load in the morning and set out on the road, unaware of how my life would transform so brutally. Initially, the drive was uneventful. Chatty radio hosts with lame jokes and long stretches of open road paths by my window as I hauled goods across America. Soon, though, the gory inciting incident took place on a small stretch outside Boise. A squished deer lay mangled on the asphalt, its entrails stretched across the freeway like some horrific Jackson Pollock painting. That kicked off my dreadful encounter. Anxious to forget the scene, I made a stop at a roadside diner sometime after midnight. The plan was to grab a coffee and share a joke with another weary traveler or two. Entering the brightly lit space, it looked like any other typical American diner until I saw him sitting at the counter. There was a man wearing dirty denim overalls, huddled over his coffee cup. His menacing appearance sent shivers down my spine as deep scars crisscrossed his face, all too reminiscent of a grotesquely carved pumpkin. The stranger's smirk sent a wave of unease washing over me. For some strange reason that only stubborn men can rationalize, I decided to sit next to him anyway, acting as if nothing could disturb me. Call it bravado or sheer stupidity. Just as I was about to crack one of my famous icebreaker jokes, this palpable sense of terror gripped me into silence. Instead, there was something oddly familiar about this man, like I might have met him or encountered him in some dark dream, whose details were hastily forgotten upon waking up. It wasn't until he asked me who I was chatting with on my phone moments ago that a realization struck. He was the serial killer from the news reports and those frantic neighborhood grapevine stories, the one who preyed on unsuspecting truck drivers just like me. My heart caught in my throat as nausea drained my face of any color. It was almost impossible not to recognize him at that moment. The man's attention seemed to shift away for a few moments, giving me an opportunity to excuse myself and dash into the restroom. While trying to catch my breath, I pondered my options. Was there enough time to call the police? Would he even be here when they arrived? My hands shook as anxiety threatened to paralyze me with indecisive terror. As the seconds ticked away, I heard footsteps approaching the bathroom door. A pounding fear collected in my chest as I forced myself not to breathe and softly slipped into a stall. That's when I heard his eerie laughter fill the room, turning my blood cold as ice. The eerie laughter echoed through the bathroom, and I knew I had to do something. Struggling to maintain my composure, I formulated a plan in my mind. With no other option, I decided not to call for help, but instead tried to escape the diner undetected. When the laughter stopped and his shadow disappeared from under the bathroom door, I cautiously stepped out of the stall. Creeping to the entrance of the bathroom, I peered into the diner to see that he had returned to his seat at the counter. This was my chance. Moving discreetly and taking advantage of any cover offered by the diner's interior, I approached a nearby pay phone to alert the authorities. Before picking up the receiver, I noticed the local newspaper left on a table nearby. The front page headlines screamed about yet another murder by the truck stop killer, a man named Theodore Crane. Suddenly it all clicked into place. How he knew things about me that he had no business knowing. How he seemed oddly familiar, like fate bringing him right here where I sat. Unquestionably, this was him. Theodore was the abhorrent monster responsible for all those brutal killings. Knowing that time was against me, before Theodore Crane became suspicious of my absence, I made my call quickly but quietly. The 911 operator answered my distressed call, and I frantically whispered all pertinent information without revealing too much detail about my surroundings. When back near my table, I covertly searched for any possible exits other than the main door. I spotted an emergency exit concealed behind a decorative poster on one of the booth tables. I was slowly approaching it and doing everything in my power not to draw attention to myself. As soon as I reached it, having glanced back only a few times to ensure Theodore hadn't left his seat, An approaching waitress carrying an overfilled tray blocked me unexpectedly from prying open the exit door. Waiting felt like an eternity, but eventually the waitress moved on, and I made my escape out the rear entrance. The cold air intensified the chill emanating from my sheer terror as I sprinted to my truck and with trembling hands unlocked the door. My heart raced as I pulled away from the diner and sped down the highway, desperate to distance myself as far away as possible from Theodore. The haunting image of his sinister grin remained etched in my memory. Only a few miles down the road, the reassurance of police sirens approaching in the distance filled me with an odd sense of relief. But given Theodore's cunning nature shown so far, it was hard to believe he would be easily captured. And deep down, even though I had done all I could to leave Theodore behind for good and alert the police to his presence at that roadside diner, an unsettling premonition lingered, as if listening to a horrifying narrative play out in my head. It became evident that this man, this monster, was beyond any measure of humanity. Every murder he committed was an act of pure brutality. A nagging fear gnawed at me, a fear that I could never fully escape him, nor ever forget what I had seen. A fear that his name would continue to haunt me for as long as I would exist. The road stretched unnervingly before me, and all I could do was drive. It seemed unlikely that Theodore Crane could or would ever be caught. I was unsure if any cliffhanger in this gruesome tale would ever unfold, or if anyone who had encountered this blood-chilling man could genuinely comprehend what was left in his dark wake. But a small voice deep within held out hope that maybe one day it might all end. If not for me, then perhaps for someone else who has yet to cross paths with the truck stop killer, Theodore Crane. It was a Wednesday evening shift when it happened, and for the life of me, I can't shake those horrifying memories out of my mind. My name is Jasper Callahan, and I'm a truck driver who's always had a knack for keeping things light-hearted and cracking jokes whenever things get tense. That day, like any other, started off pretty ordinary. I had my usual stop at Bucky's Diner in rural Mississippi to unload some supplies. The staff was friendly, and the place wasn't too shabby for a pit stop on long hauls. As I finished up and got back on the road, it didn't take long for me to realize something was off. There had been several reports about a mysterious presence terrorizing truck drivers during their night shifts. Fellow drivers even shared stories of a brutal-looking man with bloodshot eyes and an unsettling grin. His motives were unknown, but you know what they say about truckers. We've got more tales than Shakespeare could ever write in 1,000 years. Before I knew it, dusk settled in like an unwelcome guest, wrapping its cold arms around the landscape. The familiar hum of my big rig's engine patrolled the nearly empty highway as the sun bowed out for the evening. A heavy fog rolled over the road as I passed through a densely wooded area. Soon enough, my GPS alerted me that I needed to turn down an old country road that proved unusually narrow and poorly lit. And that's how horror movies begin. I chuckled to myself as I maneuvered down this newfound path. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight ahead. Strewn across the road before me were plastic bags filled with glass shards and pieces of rotting flesh. Horrified by this macabre scene, I immediately stopped my truck and leaped out to get a better look at everything in front of me. Curiosity poked at me like 1,000 rusty fish hooks, while fear answered within by screaming at me to flee. My radio crackled, cutting to the sound of a deep and sinister laugh that emerged out of nowhere. I frantically tried to make contact with the dispatcher or any other driver around my frequency, but no one seemed to be around. It was just me and this eerie presence. Suddenly, a powerful engine roared in the distance, approaching my location at a spine-chilling pace. Before I could react, a battered truck tore through the fog with blinding headlights bearing down on me like a relentless beast. I dove out of the way just in time as shattered glass and debris rained down upon where I had been standing. Time to clear out of here. Desperate for help and unclear about what was going on, I scrambled back into my rig and narrowly gunned it down the road. My paranoia hit peak levels as my radio continued taunting me with sinister laughter that made my skin crawl. The narrow country road seemed endless now, boxing me in on all sides as panic clawed at my chest. Moments later, I spotted some lights in my side mirror. It was another truck following close behind. The driver appeared disheveled under the dim light of his cab, just as the legends had said about him. I glanced back in front of me only to see an imposing figure blocking my path, a bloodied and mangled body strewn across the road. I had no choice but to swerve violently to avoid it. Slamming on the brakes, I came to a screeching halt and couldn't help but affectionately pat the dashboard of my trusty truck. "Well, buddy, we've gotten out of worse jams before," I attempted to joke. A thud reverberated through my truck as something heavy slammed against it from behind without warning or reason. Now terrified beyond measure, whimpering, sweaty, and alone, I decided that the only way out was to confront this unknown terror head-on. No more running, no more avoiding it. It was time. As if fate itself agreed with me, a horrifying figure emerged in front of my truck. The figure I saw was a man with bloodshot eyes and an unsettling grin that matched the descriptions from the legends. His clothes were stained with blood, and his hands held a weapon that looked like it had seen many gruesome acts. I knew I had to do something, anything, to stop this maniac before he could claim more innocent lives. Thinking quickly, I grabbed my tire iron from the passenger seat, silently praying I wouldn't have to use it. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I cautiously approached the killer. He didn't seem surprised by my presence or actions, but rather wore an eerie smile as if anticipating my move. Suddenly, he charged at me, swinging his weapon wildly. My instincts kicked in, and I swung the tire iron in defense, connecting with a sickening thud. The force sent him stumbling back, but did not seem to deter him in the slightest. Seeing that I was no match for him physically, I scrambled back into my truck and slammed on the gas pedal, desperately trying to put distance between us. As I sped away, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice rang fairly in my ear. Hello, yes, there's a man, he's chasing me, he's killed people, I stammered into the phone. Okay, sir, stay calm. Where are you now? The operator asked as she tried to coordinate help for me. I'm on old Route 45 near mile marker 12, I responded, my hands shaking as my truck barreled down the road. Hang on tight, she said reassuringly. I'm sending help your way. But as much as her words were meant to comfort me, they only made me feel worse because of how empty they sounded amidst this terror. Knowing time was of the essence, I drove on ahead, hoping to meet the police halfway. With adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I saw the flash of blue and red lights up ahead. Relief washed over me, and I pulled over, ready to share what I had experienced. Several police cars surrounded me, and an officer approached my window. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking concerned. I spilled the entire story, from the legends of the truck driver killer to my confrontation with him just moments prior. The officer nodded gravely as I recounted my tale. Within minutes, more squad cars arrived, and they quickly coordinated a search for this bloodthirsty terror. Despite their efforts that night, and in the days following, no trace of the brutal killer was ever found. My truck bore evidence that our battle had taken place, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. The legend turned very real for me now. A nameless, faceless terror who roamed those roads with malicious intent. The visions of what he did to those unlucky enough to encounter him haunt me each night in my dreams. The authorities tried to assure me they were doing everything they could to find him and bring him to justice. But even with their assurances, the feeling that he could still be out there, watching me, lingered like an unspoken truth. Whether it was divine intervention or pure happenstance that allowed me to escape his grasp may never be known. While some may carry on telling those tales around campfires or radio chatter between long hauls, one fact still remained. This gruesome killer existed in reality, and neither I nor anyone else could truly rest easy knowing he was still out there, lurking, waiting for his next victim. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.